It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Chris Persianen, joined today by Kayla Wenzel. Kayla, we have a great show planned today, but first and most importantly, how are you?
Chris, thank you for saying that was most important. I think all of our fans out here really want to know how I am doing today.
They do.
But I'm good. It is a nice Saturday. It was beautiful outside earlier, and it is now 11 p.m. And here we are. We're still out here, still going. The day never ends for us.
A long one indeed. Fortunately for us, because we had the opportunity, as will be discovered in the show, to interview Mark Healey and to interview Brian Mahoney. Mark Healey, of course, the author of a new book, Gotham Baseball, the all-time New York baseball team was decided by Healey as the soapbox for his book, and it was a great read. It was great to ask him about. So in regards to the show, I think we've got a lot of good discussion to get into today. Brian Mahoney, AP, NBA national writer, excited to get to talk to him about the playoffs, about the local Knicks and Nets. Not Cinderella story for the Knicks. It might honestly be the Hawks who defeated them, who are the Cinderella story this year, unfortunately. But to get to talk about the playoff landscape, the offseason projections for New York and Brooklyn with Brian is going to be an honor as we get into that as well. And on the topic of the NBA, later in the show, we are going to be getting into head coaching. Lots of jobs opening, some job openings closing now as teams are finding their guys, their fits. The NBA lottery has came and gone. The positions are official, with Detroit landing the draft's premier spot. However, lots of prospects that I find very, very intriguing in this year's draft. The Knicks have 2 first-round picks. Right. Lot to get into with the NBA draft as well. And then the playoffs going on now will close out the show. The Hawks, the Bucks, the Suns, the Clippers, and the NBA Finals. But we won't get into any of this before we touch on the MLB. Got to talk Mets, got to talk Yankees, our 2 local squads, both recently, I'll say more than the rest of the season, coming together for some more positive headlines than teams of either our fans from either team have been used to so far this year. I mean, the Mets with their painfully slow start, I'll admit, as a fan of the Mets myself. Really, really scary start from Francisco Lindor as well, after inking a $341 million deal. You could say the fans in Queens were a little concerned, but the team has done a fair amount recently to quell that. The Yankees putting things together as well, despite falling to Boston. I mean, All-Star game coming up in the MLB. Got to talk both teams. Our picks. And then, of course, we will have some correspondents, I'll name them, from our WFUV team, not live from the stadiums, but pretty much live from the stadiums because of the amount of time that those guys have spent at Citi Field this year. Dylan Balsamo, Sam Davis will be joining us to talk New York Mets. Mike Calamari, who's on the show to do headlines tonight, will be joining us to talk Yankees. And then, of course, we'll be getting into some of those headlines with Mike, including the conversation, the talk right now. Baseball, substances that stick. That is certainly something to touch on. I would pull out my sunscreen here if it were the right kind as a prop. That just what even in the summertime, Kayla.
What a disaster it's been. I mean, it's really something right now.
What a week in sports for us to get into here. It's the off season.
Of course. Islanders, big news yesterday. Or the unfortunate.
Maybe it was blocked out of my mind.
Trauma, you're not.
for a reason due to the loss, but as the Islanders season comes to a close, Nassau Coliseum as well. The end of the year for the Islanders, what that means for that team and that fan base, of course, going forward, moving into that new stadium, leaving behind some history. I cannot understate how much there is to talk about, because you've heard how much there is to talk about. I mean, from sport to sport, from league to league, from NBA offseason talk to NBA playoff talk to MLB midseason talk to NHL postseason talk. We are to Euro Championship talk as well with Mike Calamari. We're all over the world today, really here on one-on-one global, worldwide, WFUV worldwide. I heard that's what the W stands for. Our producer Alex Wolves can confirm behind the scenes. We thank him as always for all his hard work, and just really excited to dive into today's program, of course, with the listeners by our hypothetical side here next to our hypothetical. We got a little fireplace to gather around and talk sports. That's how I like to imagine one-on-one.
It's the summertime, Chris. We're not gathering
exactly.
Fireplace.
Bonfire?
Okay.
All right. Beach bonfire sitch.
Beach bonfire.
Get some sports talk going. I mean, just right in the WFUV spirit, right in the New York spirit. Everyone everywhere you go at this time of year, you've got to be able to find someone talking sports out on the streets in New York. I mean, such an impactful time for so many leagues, as I was mentioning, and I can't wait to dive into it. So we do have Michael Calamari on. We're going to have Sam and Dylan also from WFUV's star-studded reporting roster joining us as well. And as I mentioned, Mark Healey, Brian Mahoney will also be coming on the show. So stay tuned here on WFUV, one-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. We will be right back after this break to get into baseball.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Chris Persianen with Kayla Wenzel by my side today. We're joined by Dylan Balsamo and Sam Davis from WFUV's, as I mentioned, star-studded reporting roster. Sam and Dylan are Mets correspondents. Having spent a lot of time at Citi Field this year, we're excited to have them here to get to talk to them about the Mets, their season thus far, their approach going into the trade deadline, and all things of the sort. Sam, I want to start with you as in regards to just the environment. So being at Citi Field, baseball, New York City, all of the above, coming back alive. What's it been like to be there? Just to be in the park?
It's been tremendous. I think especially Jacob deGrom starts are pretty electric, and it just feels like every time he takes the mound, it feels like a playoff atmosphere almost. Really, people really come in large numbers, and it's nice to have Citi Field at full capacity too. Of course, that helps. But it's been awesome. It's been great to have a bunch of fans back. I know I missed them so much. Reporting and covering the team is an awesome experience, but it's even better when you have 30, 40,000 fans there. Really cheering on the Mets, which is huge. And I think there's a ton of excitement around this team this year. There's a lot of excitement in New York around the Mets. They're obviously, in first place, playing really good baseball. Not only when Jacob deGrom takes the mound, but really every night. The Mets fans are really bringing it, which I think is awesome. And I'm really looking forward to, as we record this, of course, this afternoon, Saturday, Jacob deGrom will be on the mound, and I'm expecting a loud and an exciting crowd to be there. So it's been awesome. I don't know about Dylan. He was there Friday night, but the crowds have been, I think not as big as expected. They've been a little thin at times, but the people that are there are certainly bringing it. So maybe that's a little bit of people not being totally comfortable really going to a full stadium yet. But the people that are there are really bringing the noise, and I think they're reflecting the Mets fan base in general and just how exciting this team is.
Dylan, I wanted to go right to you as our resident connoisseur of vibes.
Vibes.
Okay, I appreciate that. First off,
that's your new title.
So
put that on a business card.
Look at the shirt. He's got the vibe right now.
This is what I'm saying.
I'm currently at home with my family. I put on this shirt, and I was coming downstairs to do this. My mom said, "You're going on in that?"
Man,
right,
you can't win. You can't win, Dylan. I wanted to ask you about the beginning of the season compared to now, what was previously perhaps a scary time for Mets fans after signing Lindor to the extension, being disappointed not only with his direct results, but just the on-field product in general. Things have to be different now with the on-field product looking a little more gelled, improved. I want to know what your take on that is as someone who's spent a lot of time actually watching the team.
Well, absolutely. It's a good question. And I think there's two aspects to it. First off, you look at Lindor and you look at the contract he signed as an extension with the Mets coming into the season. 10 years and upwards of $300 million. That's a long time, and more importantly, that's a lot of money. And I can imagine that takes a big emotional toll on a person when suddenly there's just so much more money in their life. So, I would like to say more than most people I knew. I was giving Lindor the benefit of the doubt coming into the season because I knew it might take him a little while to adjust to that. That's a huge adjustment. And forgive, there's a printer going on right next to me, and I apologize. It's a Wi-Fi printer. Someone's doing
Always a mess, Dylan. Always
right?
a mess.
Always about the Mets. But here's the other thing about Lindor, and here's the important part, is what we have learned over the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure Sam has noticed this too, is you get to see just how much of a leader he is on this team, even when he's not hitting, when he's not producing offensively, and maybe when he makes an error defensively. He is the most vocal guy out there on the field, and you can ask anyone on this Mets team, he is like having a second manager right there on the field. So, that's a very good sign of what the next 10 years are going to mean for this Mets squad, even when Lindor is not the top hitter on the team. If he's hitting 212 like he was coming into a couple days ago. It's going to continue to improve, especially this season, but it's okay for now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that Mets being in first place, I mean, it has to be an incredibly exciting experience right now. I mean, they were nowhere, they were nothing, and then they suddenly are something, and they're actually holding on to first place. So, obviously, as a Phillies fan, I do hate it emotionally, but on this show, I support it as a sports reporter for New York. You have to give them credit where credit is due. And so, I mean, the original plan was like 3 to 5 years. So they're already kind of ahead of that if you really think about it. They're already kind of moving forward in a manner that is better than expected, I would say.
Yeah.
I am reveling in your misery, Kayla. I have to admit.
Yesterday though, Aaron Nola, can we appreciate the history that he made? I mean, it was wasted, but let's just appreciate it here.
Well, that's the thing, is that is the biggest problem with this Mets team right now. In the more recent future is this offense, because all credit to Aaron Nola and everything he was able to do. Tying that record, especially record with Tom Seaver, at Citi Field in Flushing, Queens, really really cool stuff, and you got to give him a ton of credit. And Dylan was there, and I'm sure that was a cool experience to be able to see that. But it shows a kind of a big issue over the last week or so with this Mets team, which is their offense definitely struggling, despite the fact that McNeil is back, Conforto's now back. Like we mentioned, Lindor is starting to play better. It's a little puzzling, a little confusing. I don't worry too much about it, just because during this time, the pitching staff has stepped up even more, it feels like, than they did in the past. David Peterson is a big guy I point to, because when Lucchesi got hurt, Peterson has had, I think, 3 good starts in a row. He's really picked things up, helping the team win. And just like, even I know he, the game he pitched, the Mets lost, but he really gave everything he had. He's been pitching very well lately. So the pitching staff has seemed to like pick things up and take things to another level, which I didn't even think was really possible because of how well they've pitched, like the starting pitching and even the bullpen too. But the fact that they're just kind of picking up where the offense is kind of struggling, and the Mets are finding a way to still play like 500 baseball during that time, during this like week or so, especially against divisional opponents, it's huge. And I think it shows good teams do that. When one part of the team is struggling, let's say if the offense is really struggling, but the pitching staff picks them up, or even the other way around, if the pitching staff is struggling, the offense will pick them up. Good teams go through stretches like this. It happens. It's not something to sound all the alarms about, which a lot of New York fans do in general. But I think I know, Dylan, you're dying to jump in, but I think that's just like that's a big key. That's what good teams do. They pick things up when other things are down. And when this Mets offense is struggling, the pitching is carrying and they're still winning games. I think that's important.
I think what's important to note about this team is that, as everyone comes back, the expectations are going to get higher. As this team felt injuries of McNeil and Nimmo and Conforto, and we saw what we were calling the replace Mets. The fact that they were finding new ways to win games it created this mentality of, I would say, Mets are playing well, considering. If I made some kind of souffle, you'd go, this is pretty good, considering. Kayla does a great job hosting this show, considering.
Oh.
What does that mean? Uh-oh.
Kayla knows what it means. But anyways, the point of what I'm saying is expectations are rising now that some of the expected starters are back. And that's just going to be something the Mets are going to have to find their way back into the season. It's a groove they're going to have to find because they're almost half of a new team now than they have been for the last month.
I have to ask, not just about returning talent, but potentially adding talent. Sam spoke about the bat. There has been a lot of talk about improving the rotation, potentially via trade. As guys who have spent, again, a lot of time around the clubhouse, I have to start before even getting into names of potential candidates. Like, is this a team you're looking to make some trades to improve? Do you think that what they have going in the clubhouse is valuable enough to let this group rock? Is there a certain position group you're running to go make a trade for? Either of you can jump in here with your general manager cap on and chime in, because I'm genuinely curious with the atmosphere of the team. I remember during the Knicks season, there were some reports internally that the team was concerned about breaking up what they had going chemistry wise.
Yeah. Dylan and I have really this question. I think it was asked maybe a couple of weeks ago or maybe even a week ago. It kind of caught us by surprise at first because it's not really a thing a lot of Mets fans and I'm sure the organization has thought about it, but I guess Mets fans and people on the outside haven't really considered it too much. You can always get better at the deadline. So it's definitely something the Mets should look into. And because Lucchese's hurt, I think a back end of the rotation piece would certainly help. But it's not like I don't see it as a requirement, just because if David Peterson continues to pitch well, that's fine. And then you're going to get Carrasco back, who's really your fourth starter. Come playoff time, you really only need 4 starters. Or even down the stretch, to be honest. So it's not like a dire need, but sure, I mean, it would help. And then I guess if Carrasco does come back and he's healthy and pitches well, then you kind of have an abundance of riches, and you almost have too many starting pitchers, which I guess is a pretty good problem to have.
Wonderful problem to have.
Yeah, you can shift somebody to the bullpen. So, but I think the bigger concern is the Mets offense, which has been decent at times, and then, like I said, right now is not very good. But where do you look for help? I'm not really sure who's available at the moment. I think a lot of people, at least in the off season and then coming up to the deadline, anticipated the Cubs to be not very good. And then Chris Bryant was the guy that was maybe on the block. The guy who's played outfield and can also play third base. Although I know Jonathan VR has had a good year, but that's a guy a lot of people think of for his bat. But the Cubs are playing well, so I don't think he's available. And then, I don't know, you go down the list. I guess it's going to be kind of a wait and see situation. You got a little while till the deadline still. So you got some time to figure it out. But I'm sure, and I'm pretty positive that the Mets are going to make some sort of move. And I think it might come on the offensive side of things.
I'd have to agree with you there, Sam. As he mentioned, this is something, we keep getting asked about. But, it's interesting. And I'll say what I've said before is that it's hard to know really, because even still at this point, even with McNeil and Conforto back, it's hard to tell what kind of team this squad is going to be come late July, what they're really going to need coming down the stretch. We don't really know yet. Obviously another starter is what everyone has their heart set on at this point. I'm not entirely sure if that's what they need yet. Obviously you can't have bullpen games in the playoffs, or at least I don't think so. Maybe you can, but I don't know. Never been done before, but maybe it's possible. My point is,
anything with this team, Dylan.
And honestly, truly, but the point is, most people saying a starter. I don't know if that's the right move yet. My first thought actually was third base. As much as I like Jonathan VR and Luis Guillorme and everyone who's been playing there, I think this team just needs that little extra boost there. Obviously everyone was talking about Chris Bryant. People have been talking about Chris Bryant coming to the Mets for, I feel like, a year and a half now. And I don't think it's going to happen at this point. And I don't really know who else would be on the market in terms of good third baseman. So, yeah, it's just going to be another waiting game.
Can't believe that the big bucks for that decision, Dylan.
That name, Chris Bryant, was going to be the one that I brought up. But as you guys were saying, he kind of he seems to have ruined the Cubs plans there a little bit with
he's not going to get dealt. I mean, he's like a perfect fit though, because he can play outfield too, which I think is nice to have a little bit. He plays left field for the Cubs also, which is big. mean, he's not a great left fielder, but just to have that bat in the lineup would be huge. But yeah, the Cubs are right in it. I mean, I think they're in tied for first place. So they're not. He's not going anywhere. Unfortunately.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, Sam, is I've noticed about left field, it has become the DH of the National League. When you want one of your infielders to play.
Like Dom Smith out there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, not that Dom Smith's a bad left fielder. But
he's gotten better. He's gotten a lot better.
He's gotten a lot better, but he's in the lineup for his bat. It does seem left field turns into.
We love Dom Smith.
Oh, we love Dom Smith. We love Dom Smith.
We do.
What a win that he contributed to the first game of the two. We love Dom Smith.
Some of us don't love Dom Smith today, okay?
We love Dom Smith.
You know, I want to mention something here. Kayla, you would have loved this. So obviously the Mets are playing the Phillies yesterday to split the doubleheader.
Yeah.
You know, it was the biggest capacity I've been at so far this season. It was upwards of 29,000 fans yesterday. And Bryce Harper had, I believe, 6 at bats. And man, the booing is back, man. That's what's the best part about that. He got booed. He went 0 for 5 before his home run in, I think it was the 6th yesterday.
Yeah.
The stadium fell silent. He comes out.
Shut him up. He was like, get out.
Oh, God, the curtain call this guy took. Bryce Harper, you say what you want about him. He is the best villain baseball's had in a really
I agree.
time. So good for him on that end.
Love to hate him. Even though he's on my team, when he wasn't on my team, I had to hate him, you know? I had a lot of mixed feelings about it.
Yeah.
He is such a villain character in baseball.
New York, speaking of, we might have just created one in a different sport in the 6-foot dust for hair. No.
Okay, but let's stay on topic with the Mets here. What's your next question for me, Chris?
Listen, Dylan, I wanted to wrap up.
Dylan today.
Yeah, I know. I'm
Dylan,
here too. What am I?
Dylan and Sam. I wanted to wrap up by just we talked trade. I got to know about Pete Alonso, my guy Polar Bear Pete. Just how's he been in the clubhouse? How's he doing?
Well, that whole Donnie Stevenson thing, I have to say, it's a little tired. I mean, it's not working. You know, he came out with his personal hitting coach or the Mets team hitting coach, whatever it may be, and they're not really hitting right now. So I love Pete Alonso. He's great for the clubhouse, but that whole Donnie Stevenson bit, I don't know about you, Dylan. You might still like it, but for me, it's a little tired at this point.
I agree. I feel like the focus is in the wrong place for Pete at the moment, considering he's only hit 1 home run at home so far this season. So that's something that needs to change.
Yeah.
But, you know, I feel like when Donnie Stevenson as an idea first came around and the Mets had the best offensive weekend they've had all season.
I love that weekend.
I guess at this point it was just a coincidence because since then the Mets offense has really been lacking, with the exception of some games against, you know, the Orioles and a good game or two against the Cubs. It's really all it's been. So, you know, for the Mets and specifically for Pete, it needs to become a little more of a focus on the offense. And I will say Pete has improved defensively at first base this year, just like he did last year. It's an upward climb for him. But he's not hitting at home, and you're just not going to continue to have success if you're not hitting at home.
Got to start to happen. We'll see how the Mets do this season. We'll see what they do at the deadline, if anything, and we'll know that we have Dylan and Sam on location to give us live reports. Dylan, again, to sign you off as our vibes connoisseur. We appreciate the vibe update. Sam, the analysis, impeccable. Just thank you to Dylan and Sam for stopping by. WFUV. She said you're only here for the vibes.
Sam comes here for the real talk, but Dylan just comes in to make vibes. That's all he does. He's just
well, then what are you here for, Kayla? I still don't know.
Okay. Everybody settle down here. Settle down.
Some infighting here on air, but not before I swap out our beautiful Mets correspondents for Mike Calamari. Dylan and Sam, thank you guys again. And Mike, we're going to bring Mike on to talk Yanks because we are from the Bronx in Fordham. And we got to talk Yankees. Mike, it's great to have you on. we thank Dylan and Sam again for their time, and we're excited to get to talk to you. I want to start off by asking a similar question that I did to Dylan. From the start of the year to now, how do you feel about this Yankees team and how they've come along?
I think it's no surprise that the Mets reporters have a little more energy and excitement around the team than the Yankees fans might. It's definitely not the best time to be a Yankee fan, but listen, they're starting to turn around and they've looked better outside of that Red Sox game the other night. They've looked pretty good. I think there's still some serious problems with this lineup. I think Gary Sanchez has been one of the lone bright spots. Him and Aaron Judge have really been picking up the slack behind, from the other guys at the plate. They've really been doing a great job, but there's not a lot with this Yankees lineup that can really do anything. I mean, there's only 3 guys hitting above 270. So that is very worrying for this lineup. And they have been struggling all season with guys on runners on base now. In the past few games, they have done better at that, but it's still an issue of concern. And then on the other side of it, with the pitching, the starting pitching has really struggled since Kluber has gone down. I mean, Garrett Cole is the only guy with an ERA under 4. And it seems like when he's not on the mound, it's going to be a tough to get a win. So I think the Yankees still have a lot to do if they want to make a pursuit for this wild card spot. I think the division is going to be tough for them, but listen, it's a long season and the Yankees are going to have time to try to find a way to handle this, especially with an all-star break coming up.
Yeah, and it's funny to me that you mentioned that, Gary Sanchez is his red hot presence right now, and that's something that's really been helpful. But like a couple weeks ago, you would probably not be saying that. Like we would not be talking in that
We
manner.
would have been killing him a couple weeks ago, yeah.
So I just think that how has this been this constant up and down, this love and hate, like this? I mean, I guess that's just sports in general.
New
but
York sports.
like for Yankees especially, like, they're a team that has so much prestige to them. And then when they come out and it's so disappointing, I feel like it rips people a lot deeper than the Mets, because people don't have that high of expectations yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's definitely tough because it feels like after every game, if you follow Yankees Twitter or any media around the Yankees, they're willing to kill them after a loss, and they act like any loss. Like, for example, the Royals loss in Game 1 of that series, they thought that was the worst thing of all time, and they ended up turning around and winning the series. But that's just the type of fans Yankee fans are. Like, they're willing to kill them when they're down, and when they're up, think they're the best
I'll
team.
kill for them when they're up, you know?
Essentially. So it's definitely a lot of ups and downs this season, especially the Yankees, because there's been more downs than ups, which makes it even worse. And one day you're really excited about the team, and the next day you're like, where are the hits going to come from? And that's a big issue. And I think that if you pump the brakes a little bit and you wait out this team at the end of the All-Star break, and when you move into the second half of the year, you could see one that's pursuing a wild card spot and maybe at the top of that, and you're going to get home field advantage in that game. There's still a lot of time, and we're not even halfway through the season. So it's going to be interesting what this team becomes. And you also, I think you get hopefully Corey Kluber at the end of July back, Luis Severino at the end of July, maybe beginning of August, both those guys. But when you get healthy, this team is going to look a lot more intriguing than it looks right now.
Well, Mike, to Kayla's point, we were told once here on One-on-One by the great Ron Bloomberg that Yankees fans go to Yankee Stadium to see a win. And that it's an obvious statement, but it's a meaningful and strong one. And I think it says a lot towards your point regarding expectations. These fans are used to the best, man. So I can get the disappointment, the quickness to turn on players, but I do think with this squad, this new era of Yanks baseball, maybe a little patience might be required. However, to speak to something that represents quite literally the opposite of patience, we spoke about this with our Mets reporters. The trade deadline starting to seem like it's approaching. I'm going to come out and say the name. The Athletic put out an article the other day by Jim Bowden saying that the Yanks should move for Marte. Is this type of acquisition, like that big of an acquisition, what you think the Yankees need? Or are you a fan of building this team up and trying to do something with this group?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because on the last two nosebleeds ago, I had the same argument with Ryan Gregware, and we went at it for a while, actually. And there's no doubt that Keita Marte is having a great season. I mean, he's hitting over 360, and he's a switch hit bat. So the Yankees are in need of a left-hand bat. So obviously, with him, you have that. And Yankee Stadium is a stadium that really caters to left-hand hitters. So a guy like him sounds very, very good for this team. But the way I see it is that I'm not willing, if I'm in the Yankee front office, to give up a large load for a guy like this. That, of course, he's dominating right now, but there's no guarantee he has the same production when he comes to the Yankees. And this team is not one piece away, in my opinion. I mean, there's still a lot of guys on this team that are struggling to hit. Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez are the two hottest hitters right now, but outside of them, there's a lot of guys that are really struggling. Clint Frazier, Brett Gardner, Urshela's okay. Gleyber Torres really struggling. I mean, just because you get Keita Marte doesn't mean those guys started hitting as well. And if you're going to give up your entire farm system and then in 2 or 3 years, let's say you don't win a World Series, and you're back to square one where, well, we don't have any young guys because we gave it all up for this one guy back in 2021, and you're going to constantly in the cycle of trading. That's what the Yankees have really been in for a long period of time. So in my opinion, I think you go the route of the Rays and you trade guys for prospects, which is what they have done. Think about it. Blake Snell, they trade for a reliever and prospects. How's Blake Snell doing right now? Not very good. So that move looks really good for them. Charlie Morton, they dealt. But since Charlie Morton has left, the Rays have still been at the top of the AL East every single year. So there's got to be something they're doing that the Yankees are missing out on. And that's why I'm not really a huge fan of jumping on Keita Marte just because he's the new fun thing that the Yankees fans really want, but they're not thinking about the long term.
Trying to pass up on the urge for the shiny toy, as I suppose you might call a player like Marte in sports being available. I mean, it's tempting for sure to have that talent in the building, but I respect your patient perspective on the topic. Mike, if you have any final thoughts on the Yankees, any thoughts on improvements you think this squad needs to make to have a successful year, I'd love to hear them. Like, what to you defines this season as a success, if it happens?
Health. I think health would be the biggest thing, Chris. I mean, how many years have the Yankees struggled to get a 5-man rotation that stays healthy throughout a 162-game season? I think that is rare throughout the MLB, but the Yankees have been one of the worst teams to dealing with injuries. And how many times have Luis Severino been in rehab and had a setback or just have to go through it time and time again? I think that is the biggest thing the Yankee team needs to get healthy, and then we'll see when it comes to August. I think if they can get healthy, then there's a serious talk about this team going to be a playoff contender.
Sounds good. Even as a Mets fan, as I like to say, I do secretly a little bit root for just like New York baseball success. The basketball, different story. The Nets do not receive the same type of kindness from my basketball heart, but my baseball heart has enough room in it for
two teams.
room to throw a little love the Yanks way, especially when they might need it in a season like this one. Mike, we'll see how they do. It was great to have you on and to get your analysis. We'll talk to you later in the show as you run the headline segment, which I'm excited for. After this break, we'll be heading into headlines with Mike, but not before we interview Mark Healey, the author of Gotham Baseball. So stay tuned. This has been One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Stay tuned after the break.
One on One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Chris Persianen with Kayla Wenzel, joined today by special guest, Mark Healey. He is the editor-in-chief at the Rockaway Wave and Gotham Baseball. He is the author of Gotham Baseball, New York's all-time team, and he is a coach. He is an esteemed coach of a little league team. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you on. How you doing?
I'm doing great. My Little League days are over, but I do have some very fond memories of coaching in Little League.
I had to throw it in there after reading online that just one of your articles about coaching. There's something about that, the perspective that gives you as someone who's coached a lot of first and second graders in basketball. I just always a tip of the cap to my fellow younger league coaches for their patience that I assume was employed.
No, I'm still coaching my son, although he is going to be 20 in September. They have a basketball summer league team that I'm coaching right now. So I coached a lot of these kids back in the day. So it's a lot of fun. I'm having a blast doing it.
Well, that's great to hear. We are, even if I'm in New Jersey, we are in our hearts. We're all in New York City, the home of the Yankees and the Mets, who both teams right now, the recipients of some more positive press than they've been getting earlier this year, and that's it's their own doing. I wanted to start with the Yanks. We are, of course, Fordham University, despite my Mets fandom and my love for Francisco Lindor. I got to start with the Yankees, 30 streets south of us, up at Rose Hill. They fell to the Red Sox, but something about that doesn't matter to me. The last couple weeks have felt different for this team. Would you agree that this team is shaping up? Its heart is being constructed, or do you see a soulless payroll?
Look, as someone who is not a Yankee fan, even though I am a Mets fan, I've covered both teams forever, and in my book, I talk about why I don't hate the Yankees. I'm not one of those guys that hate the Yankees. The Yankees have always been good to me personally. And as a historian, I absolutely love the tradition and the history of the Yankees. So I can look at the Yankees as a journalist and cover them the way that I would any baseball team. And I've covered them all. So, to me, the Yankees are just another team, but because they're in New York, because I have this love for my city, my the place that made me, and I've lived other places. So that's why I love New York so much. I think the Yankees are they're a victim of their own success, right? In past years. I think that, I look to getting rid of Joe Girardi and putting in Aaron Boone as a minus. Okay. I know the team has performed better, or at least has won a lot of games under Aaron Boone. This year, that's not the case, but they're still struggling along. I don't think it's Aaron Boone, though. I don't think Aaron Boone is the problem. I think the players respect Boone. I think that the players respect Mike Blake, the pitching coach. I think they respect Hensley Mullins. I think the problem is that, like any veteran-laden team, right, that has a foundation of guys that have been there, have done that. Aaron Judge hasn't played this many games in a year and a half. It's just a matter of getting these guys in a sync. And young guys when you have a young team made up of young guys that have all this personality, which you're really not allowed to do when you're a Yankee. Let's be honest, you're not. You have to be very serious. You have to be very professional. And that appeals to me. as an old man who has watched baseball for a long time. It does appeal to me. But it also doesn't allow for some of the joviality that goes on, let's say, across town in Flushing.
Right.
So there's a seriousness to what they're doing. I watched the game last night after being, as I was being devastated by the Islanders. I saw a team down 3-0 come back and right away come back. Maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, the Yankees lose that game 7-0. It's still a loss,
Right.
and it's still a loss in the AL East. I think the Yankees are just in a situation where they're trying to find their way. And very luckily, the teams ahead of them, neither of them are a powerhouse either. So, when you have a situation where the Yankees are trying to get their bullpen squared away, and had another injury last night with Zach Britton, which is brutal. They're going to have to try to fix things without having kind of the payroll flexibility that they've had in the past, because I think Hal Steinbrenner is like, all right, Cash, you got to do this without spending $30 million more. Like, you got to figure it out. So I think it's still June. It's the end of June, but it's still June. I think that if you're a Yankee fan or if you cover the Yankees, they're not soulless. They're just serious. The 1996 Yankees weren't exactly the 86 Mets. That was a very serious team that
Right.
was boring, some people would say. But at the end of the day, you don't get extra credit for creating a fake hitting instructor. You don't get any extra credit for that. Maybe it makes the younger aspect of your fan base a little bit more excited about your team, but the Yankees are the Yankees. I picked them to win the AL East. I still think they're going to win the AL East. It's just a matter of, last year was a 60-game season, and it was a weird season. We're still coming out of the pandemic. I think that if you don't think that plays a role into what's going on, you're just not paying attention.
Right.
No Donnie Stevenson love, Mark. You don't think the Yanks could benefit from bringing in a Donnie?
It is the dumbest thing. It is the worst. It just I love Pete Alonso. I do, but it's awful. I hate it.
You mentioned the team in Queens, and you mentioned how you're really more of a Mets fan. How have you been feeling about their season? They're in first place right now. They did split to the Phillies last night, but are you feeling optimistic about this team? Do you feel like they maybe have a chance to really go all the way?
That's a great question, Kayla. Optimistic is not a word I ever use for any team that I root for. Okay. And just to give you a little context, I'm an Atlanta Falcons fan. Okay. That is my football team. So if I ever was optimistic or confident ever in my life, that ripped my soul out.
I'm so sorry.
So it is a great question, because, you would think that with the team being in first place, that I would be optimistic. I did pick the Mets to win the NL East as well, because I felt that it was going to be a 5-team race, and it would be a war of attrition. And the team that had the least amount of injuries, the least amount of obstacles put in its path, would be the team that wins. I see the Nationals coming on. I see that the Phillies are always going to be good. There's always going to be wars between the Mets and the Phillies. The Marlins, I'm surprised by. If there's a surprise in that division this season, it's the Marlins. I'm surprised that with their pitching staff, with their position players, and with the way they go about their business, especially last year, that they've struggled this much. I don't think we've heard the last of them. I don't think they're going to go away. So optimistic is not the word I would use. I feel grateful that they've managed to stay in first place despite all the injuries, despite, not being able to really build the bridge to Edwin Diaz. I think that there's been some hits and misses. Seth Lugo, getting him back in the mix, losing Familia when he had just started to be reliable. Don't know what's going to happen with Dylan Betances. Trevor May is a kid that's struggling a little bit and trying to find his way. Looks like he's back on the good foot a little bit. But again, it's just optimistic is not the word I would use. it's more like we're lucky at this point that we're still in first place. And I say we because that's just how I feel. People will say, "Oh, that's not very unprofessional." It's just how I feel. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be like those guys that work for the Boston Globe that cover the Boston Red Sox that have box seats to Fenway, but say they don't root. Yeah. Okay. Okay, guys. So I'm grateful they're still in first. I don't think it's a birthright. I think they're going to have to fight tooth and nail for the season to stay there.
I mean, I mentioned I was a Met fan. I can't disagree. The aura around the team has been nice, has been encouraging, something to lean on. But on-field results also matter a lot.
Of course, absolutely.
I have to ask, with both parks being back, I need a one-word answer if you want to keep it non-offensive to either fan base. Which park roars the loudest? Which park, since the return, has been the better stay, the better home of the weird, beautiful sport that we love?
I mean, look, if it depends on what you want, I think that Yankee Stadium, the loudest I ever heard a stadium in my life was when Joe Girardi hit the triple in '96 against the Braves in Game 6. I mean, that is the loudest I've ever heard Yankees, a stadium.
That's a moment.
I was also in the stadium for the 2009 World Series. And when they won that World Series that night, I'm still blown away by the crowd. Shea Stadium at its best was a match for Yankee Stadium. Citi Field is not quite there yet. It just isn't, for whatever reason. I think this year, thanks to the 7 line, and in this year and past years, they've raised the bar of what happens at Citi Field, but it's still not Shea. Shea was still, it might have been a dump, but it was our dump, and that place, the literally shook. The rafters would shake, when Mike Piazza would hit a home run, or Gary Carter would hit a home run, or I go back all the way to Lee Mazzilli hitting a home run. Or something amazing happening on the field, pardon the pun. Citi Field's not there yet, man. It's just not. I'm sure that there's going to be Met fans that watch this. They're going to say Healey doesn't know what he's talking about, but it just doesn't. For me, Citi Field is not quite what Shea Stadium was. So if I had to give a grade, I'd say I say incomplete. That's my one.
Okay.
Answer. Incomplete.
So you see Citi Field's environment a little how you see the Mets. They have the Shake Shack, they have the extracurriculars, but not fully there when it matters. I see it.
That's not what I said. You're getting me in trouble. I think we're still. I think the media, I think the fans, and I have this interaction with folks on Mets Twitter all the time. The Wilpons don't own the team anymore, guys. Like, we can't talk about them or cover them or analyze them or assess them like we did for the last, since 1987, when Fred Wilpon finally became a full partner. And then he became the majority partner in 2003. The team's not handled anymore by unqualified family members. So now you have, professionals running the front office. You have an owner who is very happy to sign the checks and put forth a winning product with no prevarication, with no, outright lying about what they're planning to do for the season, with an actual budget that, doesn't have to go back and forth between the owner's son and then the owner and then the GM every 3 days. The owner's son is no longer telling people they have to play injured. I mean, the dynamic is different, but I still think that when people go to the ballpark, as happy as they are to be back, it's not Shea. And maybe that's just old man Mark telling kids to get off his lawn, but it just doesn't have the same energy. Now, have I been at the stadium as much as I'd like to do a fair assessment? No, the answer is no. But I get a sense of watching. I know people that are there. I talk to them. I ask them that same question. And most of the people that have been at Shea, that were at Shea during the glory days, it's just not Shea yet. And that doesn't mean it's not going to get there. But right now, it's just not.
Right. And so you've kind of talked about how you're a historian and about everything that's going on. And so I just sort of want to know about, how did you get your idea to write your book, Gotham Baseball, New York's all-time team? I think that's such an interesting book, and it takes you through the history of all of New York baseball as we go through in New York City and its effect on the people and on the city. And so how specifically did you come up with that, and how relevant do you feel that is during the pandemic as the city comes back alive? How do you feel that changing?
I think that's a great question, Kayla. I think that, what you said, not about my book, but I'm saying about the city coming alive, the city coming back, and why it's so crucial that we, have all the right elements in place for that. And I think that the only way you can really understand it is to look at history. And that's not that, it's kind of ironic that a book about the history of baseball, through the lens of selecting players for an all-time team. I am a big believer in those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. I think that baseball, more than any other sport, celebrates its history, maybe too much, but I love the historical aspect of every sport that I cover, every sport that I watch, because there's always some kind of historical precedent. How did baseball do during World War II? How did baseball manage to still get people to come to the games during the Great Depression? How did baseball survive the Vietnam War? All these different aspects of baseball, that in Field of Dreams, I can't recall James Earl Jones's soliloquy or monologue at the end, in complete, but baseball is part of history. It's part of who we are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the idea for the book really came from back in 2005. I started a magazine called Gotham Baseball Magazine. And just recently, I bring this up because it was just so crazy. Just recently, we found the Amazon.com story. My partner, Gene Biradelli, who was the legal counsel for Gotham forever, still is, he found the link to the 2005 story that Amazon editors picks named Gotham Baseball one of the top new magazines of 2005.
Wow.
And we were the only sports magazine on that list. So, it was always cool for us that we had that critical acclaim. We didn't make a lot of money with it, but that was the genesis, that was the foundation of the book. Through the years, when magazines became unwieldy, when it became too expensive to produce a print magazine, we pushed forward and we decided to just use it as a website, because we had very popular amongst Mets fans and Yankee fans and yelling at each other. So we kept the website going. Then came a bunch of different opportunities, which I go through in the book. I actually put it in the book. The first 2 chapters are about kind of the story of Gotham baseball, because we just celebrated our 20th anniversary in 2020. Again, ironic, right? In a bad way. I was close to turning 50 years old. I think I was 49, and I was saying to myself, I'm going to be 50. People kind of sort of know about Gotham baseball. I mean, most people don't even know that the entire print run is in the Cooperstown Library, the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me in my career. And I've done some cool stuff. I was like, I want people to know what it was. I mean, it shouldn't not. I felt like it made enough of an impact, just because I wasn't a millionaire and wasn't able to get all this startup capital or, venture capitalists to invest in it. I didn't want it to be anonymous. So I thought that by doing a book about what the spirit of Gotham baseball is, which is the past and present and future of the New York game, a celebration of baseball history. I wanted to think of a way to create a book, you know, that would celebrate that. And I feel like a book is more permanent than a website, more permanent than a magazine that is no longer in print, you know? And I thought a book would be, as a long form journalist, as somebody who loves that style of writing, I thought a book would be the perfect vehicle. And an all-time team would create arguments that we've had forever. You know, who's the better catcher? Who's the better first baseman? My guy's better than your guy, that type of thing. So that was really the genesis of the book. I was going to turn 50. I was like, you know, what's my legacy? You call it a midlife crisis if you want. I just felt like, what's going to be my legacy? You know,
Right.
Or not so much my legacy as much as Gotham baseball's legacy. I wanted Gotham baseball to be something more than a website and a magazine that kind of sort of was around for a while. So the book I hope the book makes Gotham baseball a more permanent thing.
Gotcha. Well, we have to ask one last question before we wrap up.
Sure.
What was the hardest choice, and why was it Piazza over Berra?
You know, I really struggled with the catcher chapter. It was never my intention. I thought it would be, there was no predetermination going into the book who was going to be,
right.
You know, except for a few, like Jackie Robinson. There was no way Jackie Robinson wasn't going to be the second baseman. Lou Gehrig was going to be the first baseman. There's always been an argument about catcher in New York. Most of those arguments have been between Campanella and Berra. You know, the Brooklyn Dodger people will say Campanella, the Yankees, and a lot of people will say Berra. But I had a ballot that went around to, I want to say about 3,000 or 4,000 people a few years ago. And Mike Piazza was not on the ballot. It was Gary Carter. And I explain in the book why. And we don't have the time for me to go through it. But, you know, to me, Carter was the missing piece for the 86 Mets. If the Mets don't get Gary Carter, I don't think they win in 86. He, you know, corralled that pitching staff. He was their cleanup hitter. He was their superstar. You know, Keith was Keith, but Gary was the superstar. You know, Gary was the national hero. He was the guy with the big smile, with the great curtain call, still the best curtain call of all Mets of all time. So he was on the ballot. It was Carter, Campanella, Berra, and Brezhnehan from the old New York Giants. Berra did not win the popular vote. Campanella did not win the popular vote. I was shocked about Berra because Berra has that like uber love between the Yankee fans and the Met fans. The person who won the ballot was Mike Piazza as a write-in. I still, to this day, I said, look, I was so perplexed by that because there was no other write-in candidate that did any kind of more than maybe a 1% or 2% in the vote.
Wow.
And again, this went to everyone. This went to Met fans. This went to Yankee fans. This went to people in baseball, executives, coaches, players, scouts. I was shocked. Then I started to write the chapter because I was like, can I really make Mike Piazza the all-time catcher? And the guy that really kind of turned it around for me and really made it crystallize for me was Mike Vaccaro from the New York Post. Mike said that, Mike, and as far as I know, there's no affinity between the two of those guys. So it's not like, oh, he was my favorite guy to cover. Mike was not a fun guy to cover. I mean, I interviewed him a bunch of times. He, very boring guy, a lot like Jeter, not as fancy pants as Jeter, where you would have to go through 6,000 different people to talk to him, His Excellency. I love Jeter. Okay, he's in the book too. So I don't say that with anything but the highest of respect.
Of course.
Mike was like Patrick Ewing. Mike was just a guy that wanted to be left alone. He wanted to lead by example, and he did not want to play any kind of mind games with the media. He didn't really ever give the media anything to really write about. So it wasn't an affinity, but Mike we talked about it. He said to me that, Berra was a great hitter, but Mike Piazza might be one of the top 5 right-handed hitters of all time. And when you go deep into the numbers, and that's another reason why this book might lend itself to the younger fan or the sabermetric fan. I do a lot of sabermetrics and analytics, at least at the level that I can. Math is my
Right.
Math is my kryptonite. So, anything
Same
with
here.
analytics is a little frightening. But when you go through the numbers, there's no comparison. It's not even close. And when you also lump in the fact, and really I do this with the argument for David Wright as well, he was by himself in that lineup. He had 1 year where other guys around him were good. He was the best offensive player on a team that did not have a great offense. He was by himself, and he still drove in a ton of runs. He still got pitches to hit because he was Mike Piazza. Outside of the years he played with John Olerud, he never had a number 3 hitter that was on his same level. And that was just one season in '99. The rest of Mike's career as a Met, he was last man standing, first man in. And that has to play some kind of a role. Berra had Mantle. Berra, Campanella had Hodges and so many other great players around him. Neither of them were asked to be the number 1 offensive player for their club. So that played a role as well. And then the numbers don't lie. And especially the defensive metrics, when you go into Piazza's ability to call a game, his ability to frame, his ability to block the plate, even guys that maybe he didn't have such a great relationship with through his career, all talked about how they loved throwing a Mike. The biggest drawback was Mike couldn't throw guys out, but there's a lot of catchers that can't throw guys out. Berra and Campanella weren't particularly good at throwing guys out either. You don't think of, if we're talking about Johnny Bench, yeah, of course, Piazza is going to lose that battle. But right. I think that I think when you look at the chapter and you read the chapter and you look at the numbers, it's kind of hard to argue unless you're a fan of a team that, you just feel that your guy should have been the all-time catcher. Right.
Well, Mark, thank you very much. I appreciate the Piazza nod. I do enjoy that our guy in orange and blue got the nod. Gotham Baseball, New York's all-time team, is Mark Healey's book on both New York baseball teams and just the stories behind the players, whether it be Jackie, whether it be Piazza. Incredibly done. Mark, we thank you so much again for joining us and for giving your perspective. It was a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Really, thanks both of you for spending some time and listening to my long-winded answers. I appreciate it. I hope your listeners enjoy it, and really appreciate you guys having me on. Just want to shout out that I'm having a book signing. Thank God we're having in-person book signings again.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really exciting. The Rockaway Hotel in Rockaway Beach. You can go to my website, gothambaseball.com, for all the details, or follow me on Twitter at Mark C. Healey, MarkChealey.
Check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Welcome back to One on One, everyone. Now, there's been a lot of news in the MLB, some on the field, some off the field stuff, and a bit of both. And on Monday, June 21st, the MLB actually enacted their new foreign substance rules, including requiring starting pitchers to be checked for substances at least once every game. They also check relievers upon entry or removal from the game. Now, these rules have caused a lot of backlash around the league, especially concerning one instance when Max Scherzer for the Washington Nationals was checked not one, not twice, 3 times in one game, and one of the times, the last time, coming in the middle of an inning. Now, Chris, I want to start with you, and I just want to get your thoughts on these sticky substance checks that are now going around the MLB.
Oh, man. Mike, thanks for coming on, first of all, to lead us in this discussion, because I don't know where I'd start it without you. I mean, what a packed debate to enter. Just how widespread the usage was. It was like teams were teaching their players to do it. And, we're at the point now where the MLB has dropped the hammer, has come down with the decision. And they did so in a manner that I think really flexed their muscles, like power wise. They just said, hey, this is what's going on starting on this day. And they didn't, to the disdain of the pitchers, really work with like the players on the solution. They just kind of came down and said, this is what's going down. This has led to injuries. One of my own New York Mets that I root for, being one of the victims in Pilar. I mean, pitchers being unable to control the ball or as it slips out. Like, it is clear to me from the rollout of this mandate and the subsequent just reaction from various pitchers, the injuries caused by the pitches flying loose due to there not being anything that sticks in between the ball and the hand. You can effectively label this a mismanaged scenario by the MLB, in my opinion, just because of the fact that even if the idea behind their mandate is correct, they executed it in a way that was not as organized as it should have been, and that led to multiple player injuries. So as someone who doesn't have the strongest take either way on the actual use of sticky substances, I think there is a difference between your famed, infamous, I will say, sunscreen and rosin combination and then like spider tag. I just think the way that this was handled, the way that this was done swiftly was intentional so that the backlash would be minimal. But now there's more backlash, and I think it's completely valid in regards to the injuries this is causing and just this widespread of a change happening as quickly as it did.
Yeah, I have a lot of like mixed feelings about this. So on the one hand, I'm like, I support the fact that the MLB is trying to cut down on like cheating, and I feel like that's a really strong take, and I like it and I appreciate that. On the other hand, I think that it's been totally mismanaged. We talked about this like way in February. Like this kind of came up then. But they didn't institute any actual rule back then. And then suddenly mid-season, now they're changing everything up. So I feel like that is definitely a problem within the management of this whole situation. And I also think, I mean, okay, so in the Scherzer case, it was Joe Girardi who kept calling for these checks. And so, of course, my team, love, support, whatever. But I also feel like there does have to be a management on it. You can't just call for checks all the time. I mean, there has to be some sort of checks and balances to this system so that teams are not abusing it just to get in pitchers' heads and slow down the game a little bit. And like even more to that point, MLB has been trying to make their games faster for so long. They've been trying to make things like more engaging for the fans, a faster paced game, something that people are really into. And I feel like this mandate is counterintuitive to that. I feel like it actually is slowing down the game. It's kind of creating more drama, which fans are not necessarily like buying into. And I think that it's just, they're kind of losing their like old timers who love the sport. And they're also not drawing in a new and younger crowd through this management and like through this role. So I think that for them and from like a marketing perspective, this is going to hurt them more than it's going to help them, because old timers who love baseball are going to think that this is inflicting on, I don't know, like the core of the game, which is like sticky substances on pitches. And then like new timers are going to be like, now we have to sit here for longer and wait for like 3 checks to happen on the pitcher. So in of itself, yes, I like the idea of minimizing cheating, I guess, but in practice, I feel like it's not working.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because first off, this has like been a rule for years upon years that has not been enforced by the MLB. I mean, there are infamous examples like Michael Pineda with the pine tar on the back of his neck and stuff, examples like that, that there have been the league coming down on players for it, but they've been few and far between. And this has really been something that's been widely used across the league. So when you shift mid-season, you put guys at risk because the way they throw is dependent on these substances, even though that's not a good thing. That is an example. I mean, Tyler Glasnow is a perfect example of this. He was saying how because of he can't use these substances anymore, he has to change the way he threw, and then he ended up he has to get arm surgery now. So he's a perfect example of one guy that has really fell because of these new rules by the MLB.
Garrett Richards. My favorite example. Just really quickly to get into his situation, this Wednesday, he gave up 4 runs in Mike. Does anyone have a guess as to how many innings if they don't know, or play a fun little game? 1.2 innings. He gave up 4 runs. This is, of course, a Red Sox pitcher. So not the worst for New York sports fans, but Richards is a pitcher who said that baseball needed to prepare for 4-hour games if they went through with this rule change. And some things that Richards has said that I've seen on Twitter, honestly, that I found really interesting were that he made this point that pitchers aren't hitters. Oh, that's really obvious, right? But let's delve into that statement a little bit, right? Hitters, you can go out and hit 2,000 balls in a day if you really want to put the time in, spend all day outside in the heat. You can get a lot of practice in a short amount of time. Pitchers cannot, their arms can't do that. And for them to have to, he used the term different pitcher. He has to learn how to be a different pitcher. Now with the change, and he's someone who has only ever even just implied that he uses sunscreen. So no admissions from Richards, but the mid-season factor to me, Mike, is fascinating. And Kayla, I don't know how you feel with your team about just this stuck, pun intended. We're stuck right now in this period of transition.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that we're just kind of at this awkward part right now where, like you said, like mid-season, this came on all of a sudden, and it is dangerous to these pitchers who have not had proper time to adjust. And so while their spin rate is going to be a little lower. So it's like, on the one hand, I think that we have to like really define what we consider a sticky illegal substance, because I think that there are certain things that, like you had said, like spider tack and maybe like pine tar, that they're too much. Like that, it helps you get way better of a grip on the ball. But then there are
Right.
other things that should probably be allowed just to like support safety and to allow for some control on the ball. And so I think that like the MLB has indicated no clear guidelines between like they just keep calling it a sticky substance, but like what type of sticky substance is actually the problem here? Like what are they actually trying to outlaw and what are they actually trying to make illegal? And so I think that there's just so much ambiguity and vagueness, I don't think is a word, but there's a lot of like vague guidelines about it. So
I think I might be the master of creating words on air. So no worries at all, Kayla, because that's like, it's become like a hobby of mine on air. Like, what are the most ridiculous words I can create? I completely agree with you. I think that the fact that conversations can be had about how the MLB handled this is all the evidence you need that they didn't handle this as well as they could have. I mean, if we're sitting here mid-season talking about like why they stopped cheating, something's gone wrong probably. And I think you can to oversimplify, trace that back to just the normalization of the sticky substances, and now you're gonna yank the cloth from underneath the table from all the teams at once. You did it successfully. You're holding the cloth. It's in your hand. You have it. The sticky substances are gone. The problem is that you've left hundreds of plates and glasses and utensils in danger. Some of them literally shattering, talking about Mr. Kevin's face on my Mets. Yeah, some bones literally shattering as a result of this midseason change. It does not have the organization that it should have. It was not executed with the vision that it should have been. There's absolutely no way that the top decision makers of the MLB did not sit there and go, something's gonna go wrong here. No, this will be totally. They knew what the outcome of this might entail, and they went through with it mid-season anyway, which absolutely, in my opinion, gives us the reign to criticize them, whether just as fans or as media, for this approach. I can't believe that they straight up endangered their own players. This is not like, we're not talking about some, like, oh, the NFL's product is different now because no. The MLB is like physically endangering their own guys, and they're totally fine with it because it's stopping cheating. I'm not moved. I'm not moved by this movement to stop the sticky substances. I find myself sitting here saying, like, we should let pitchers keep using stuff so long as that stuff is regulated. And I don't know how the MLB couldn't have come to that conclusion themselves after that time of deliberation, because it took me 5 minutes to come up with that plan in my basement. And I don't even, I got nothing else. I can't believe that they're doing this.
Yeah, I think one thing that's another thing people are missing on this is that every single pitch and every single time someone makes contact in MLB, there's a new ball that's used. And I mean, a lot of lower levels of baseball, like you'll see pitchers like, oh, like umpire will offer a new ball and be like, no, I want the ball that was there. Because like the dirt on it, all these things, like the scuff marks, make it easier for a pitcher to grip it. And when pitchers are getting a new fresh ball with like the seams in the MLB were basically like barely off the ball, I mean, it's hard for these guys to get a good grip, and it's easy for it to slip out of their hands. So a lot of that also has to do that. I mean, the baseball's become a sport now where, because they're using baseballs all the time and pitchers can't use it, like it wasn't like that before. So it's not like you can compare it to the old days. Like I think pitchers have harder time getting in grip now than they might have had in the 1960s and 70s, which is a very difficult thing for them. And I think there's also the only thing that's been missing here is that I think that the hitters and the pitchers are being a little too sensitive around this issue. I mean, hitters had juice balls as of at least 2019 or 18. I mean, they've had it their way for a while. And then on the other side of it, pitchers were complaining about the juice balls for forever. So now suddenly when they're getting cracked down on their own thing, they're really sensitive about it, saying that, oh, you can't change this or that. I think that MLB just needs to come out with a definite thing on both of these issues. I know juice balls is kind of different, but there's a lot of these non-baseball factors that are ruling the game now, and they need to figure out definite rules on how we're going to make the baseballs correct juice-wise and how we're going to allow pitchers to use certain substances that provide them some grip. Because I know they're in talks of making a substance that can help the pitchers with grip that isn't sunscreen combination or spider tack, but that's yet to be seen. So hopefully they can make a decision on this at least entering next season.
I can't think of a future where a resolution isn't come to. I can't. They have to do something. This is frustrating me on air as Kayla's now reveling in my misery.
Yeah.
This is the turns have tabled.
He can't think of a world where there's no solution. I'm sure there's a world where there's no solution. The MLB is I find them infamous for making terrible solutions or no solutions at all. So I feel like it's definitely possible. It's definitely conceivable.
And Kayla, it's funny you mentioned terrible decisions because the second headline I want to get into is about the MLB All-Star Game. And there's actually been another backlash outside of the sticky substances that has to do with the uniforms that they just came out with for this game that we were talking about outside the show that are absolutely horrendous. But
I've got to take on these.
Outside the apparel of this game, which we can get into later, there are also some names being floated around of potential all-star guys. Gary Sanchez in talks for a potential spot on the all-star team. There's also Edwin Diaz on the other side in the National League for the Mets. So I just want to get your guys' takes as the All-Star game approaches. It's July 13th this year. Kayla, I'll start with you. Is there someone you think deserves a spot on this All-Star team or someone you've been impressed with that will be an All-Star?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was looking at the All-Star ballot and I was sort of surprised by a lot of them. I mean, we have talked about before the show, Gary Sanchez, and just how, does he deserve to be on the All-Star team from the Yankees? Does he deserve to be the All-Star catcher? He's not currently in the top 5. He's not somebody that they voted in yet. I mean, obviously fans decide, so anything goes. You have no idea what people are going to go for because it's not entirely dependent on talent. It's kind of more so dependent on how fans perceive them and if fans like them. So I think that obviously leaves a lot of stuff up in the air because fans are fickle people. We all know that. And so I think that they can kind of go any way with anything. And they have the deciding factors here. But should Gary Sanchez get on? I don't think so. I don't actually think that he's been stable enough to support the fact that he deserves to be on the All-Star team. When I think of an All-Star, I think of somebody who is consistent for me to rely on. And I'm not sure that he's been the same way. But you could also then make that argument for Francisco Lindor. He hasn't been entirely consistent all season either. But he's probably an all-star, right? So I don't know. I think that there is a lot of gray area. Obviously pitching from the Mets, they're definitely DeGrom, Stroman. I think that they have a very good chance of making it on the all-star team. But they also have been consistent. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about it because I think that who people perceive to be an all-star are not always exemplifying the perfect characteristics of an all-star.
For me, with Gary Sanchez, I think it was disrespectful that he was not in the top 5 at all. I think it was, if I remember correctly, Perez, Grandal, Maldonado, Suzuki, and then Vasquez, who all had more votes than Sanchez, and that was a little much for me. I like I said earlier, I do respect what's been happening in the Bronx recently. I think Sanchez was worthy of at least a top 4 mention vote wise, but no, not even in the top 5. I thought that was a little ridiculous. I also have to say, in regards to both New York teams, that the consistency is important, Kayla, but for someone like Lindor, As Dylan was saying earlier, there is context behind that adjustment period. And at the end of the day, it's New York City, and New York City's biggest stars you probably want them you probably want them out and about representing your league. So I would think we see a couple of Yanks and a couple of Mets.
What other Yanks
Just-
though? You said like a couple of Yanks. Like who else?
No, and now I'm already walking it. I mean, there's I want to say there's Cole.
I would say Garrett Cole and
There's
Chapman
Cole.
are at least two pitching wise. And Gary
Cole.
Sanchez, I mean, if you just look at the numbers, average wise, he's at the top of the AL catchers. I mean, OPS, he's the leading AL catcher OPS wise. So,
Yep.
I mean, there's a real conversation to be said for him. Salvador Perez having a borderline MVP season. So,
That
in
one I get.
regard,
That one I
don't see him
definitely get on the
eclipsing him,
voting.
But he's definitely top 3 in the voting, and I think he can make a run for the second catcher spot. And I think Aaron Judge is obviously going to start in right field for the All-Star game. So, I mean, 3 or 4 Yankees would be, considering the team the Yankees have right now and where
And
they
the
are,
season, and yeah.
it'd be pretty impressive if they can get 4 All-Stars.
So I think shoot for 3. Shoot for 3, Mike, and be pleasantly surprised if a fourth sneaks in
Listen,
there.
I'll take 3. I don't think it matters as much. Honestly. I mean,
Of
I
course.
think the NBA holds a lot more value towards All-Stars. I mean,
And even in the NBA recently, you're seeing now with guys like, want to talk about fan voting, guys like Alex Caruso and Taco Fall and Boban Marjanovic pretty much almost getting in
Derrick
the
Rose
All-Star
was
game.
really close, like 2 years ago, I think. He was a finalist, and he was with the Pistons having a good year, but he wasn't an All-Star caliber.
He was
player.
and he was with the Pistons, and there wasn't even a narrative besides D Rose. I think people are starting to see how All-Stars are picked and are starting to put less value into the selections. However, back to the MLB, I do think that both teams should be sending at least a couple each to the game, and that should be some good representation for Gotham baseball, as we will be calling it today in honor of Mr. Healey. Mike, I gotta know, would you pick Gary number 2 yourself if you could right now? Like, would that be where you'd put him? Is that
Chris,
is that too easy of a question?
I mean, as I am a Yankee fan, but I'm also a Gary hater, and I think that's really interesting. You're talking about the fans voting, and the Yankee fans
Duality
don't
of
like Gary
man.
Sanchez.
The duality.
I mean, Gary
it.
Sanchez is not really loved by Yankee fans. I mean, there's a real love-hate relationship there, so I'm not surprised when he wasn't doing well that he was at the bottom of the catchers voting-wise. But listen, the way he's been hitting recently, I mean, he's hitting over 300 in his last 14 games, well over 300, and he's got plenty of bombs in that span too. So it's hard not to pick the guy who's hot, and I think that momentum's going to carry him. So I would say he's probably my second catcher for the All-Star break, besides behind Salvador Perez. It's hard to really put another catcher above him. I mean, Yasmani Grandal maybe, but he's hitting 60 points less batting average wise. So I would do Perez and Sanchez as my catchers in the AL, but Gary's got to show me a lot more if he's going to convince me that he can be a catcher here for a while.
You got it. Mike, we're going to have you back on to talk soccer or football, as it's known worldwide. Tap into my Dominican side there. After that, we'll talk about the Islanders, little NHL action, and then we'll be joined by Brian Mahoney to talk some NBA. Stay tuned to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. We'll be right back after this break.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to One on One with WFUV. I'm Chris Persianen, joined by Kayla Wenzel, and we have Mike Calamari back on to talk soccer. Mike, the Euro Championships are going on. We have 16 teams left, right? So still a little bit of action to go. And despite the fun matches that we've gotten to see so far, I think that the best is yet to come here in this tournament. I mean, just this coming week, we have Belgium against Portugal, right? And then England against Germany. So I'm excited, for me to sit and watch soccer games like the Euros. I don't have the familiarity with the full rosters that I typically do, but there's just something about soccer that's so beautiful to watch that I pick up on the names quickly. And I feel now that I'm just even only a couple weeks into the tournament, I'm a real watcher of it. I wanted to get your take on the remaining teams on these upcoming matchups, and also hear from Kayla on her experience thus far watching the matches. I've found them to be very entertaining. Even if I wasn't expecting that going into it, I didn't think I'd have such a great time watching the Euros. No, I've had a good time.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about international soccer that just is so exciting. Like looking at the stadiums and the fans rallying behind their country, it's really special. And the Euros is just great because you see a lot of small European countries that really don't get the time of day in the World Cup be able to make runs. Like I think it'd be really hard for a team like Portugal to win the World Cup, but they won the Euros last time and they did it pretty convincingly. So I think that that's what makes this tournament so special. And this year there's a lot of stacked teams. I mean, just talking about some on the left side of the bracket, you've got Belgium, you've got France, you've got Italy, you've got Spain. I mean, these are powerhouses. And it's not like they're going to get away easy in these first rounds. I mean, for example, like you mentioned, Belgium gets Portugal, Spain gets Croatia, and those are going to be tough matchups, and it's going to be great to see. If I had to pick teams I really like, I think Belgium is going to be one that is going to be tough to beat. I mean, Lukaku and De Bruyne give you great goal scoring. I mean, De Bruyne's 2019-2020 UEFA Champions League midfielder of the season. In the qualifying games, he had 4 goals and 7 assists. I mean, he's one of the best there is. And when you have a guy like that heading your midfield, it's going to be really tough for another team to really get anything against you. And defensively, they've got 2 solid defenders in Vertonghen and Alderweireld. I mean, they're really good. And Thibaut Courtois in the net. I mean, all around, this is a team that's really built for this moment. And they've come and they've struggled in past international tournaments. But I think this could be the year where they really see themselves get to at least the semifinal or finals. And I mean, one other team I'll mention that I really like is, I mean, it's hard not to like France. And they're the clear favorites, in my opinion. I mean, they won the World Cup just 2 years ago.
I'm an Mbappe guy. So
Mbappe, I mean, that guy can fly. It's like
it's tough for me not to root for him.
And I mean, Benzema has a real resurgence as a goal scorer. He wasn't that in the past tournaments, but I mean, he's been great in this Euro. And they've got great midfield, Pogba, Conte, great goalie, and Hugo Lloris. So I mean, those are the two top teams, if I had to say, and they're going to be really fun to watch as they get closer and closer and hopefully play each other.
Yeah, and I think that like the bracket is so interesting because it's totally kind of like lopsided. It feels like the people on the left, like Belgium, Portugal, Italy, France, like Spain, they're going to have some of the toughest time to get to the finals. Whereas like on the right, it's like England and Germany are going to knock each other out in the beginning. And then one of them is going to get knocked out. And then it's kind of anybody's game over there. I mean, you got Sweden, Ukraine, like anyone could kind of come out of that side of the bracket. And I think that is going to lead to some really interesting matchups like as we continue, because it feels like the teams over like England and Germany Germany, whoever wins, might have perhaps a better time of like getting into the finals because they're not going up against such powerhouses so early on. I mean, we're in the round of 16 and we're already going to knock out some of the like highest tier teams. So I think that definitely lends itself to some interesting conversation. And just in general, I mean, I love just the idea of everybody, like I like the idea more of countries playing each other than cities. I don't know why, maybe that's totally random for everyone else, but I think that there's just something really powerful of like the whole country of Wales. Like no one ever talks about Wales. And now they're all together and they're all rooting for a team. And that to me is just super special. I don't know. I think it's like more fun than like, I don't know, Philadelphia and New York sometimes.
Right. So. Well, I was about to bring this up in regards to Belgium because I watched Belgium play in their 2-0 rout of my half home Finland. Not the most impressive team, I will admit, at all. But defensively, they were able to provide just a little bit of a challenge for Belgium. And I think that it's games like that Belgium has come out of that make me kind of like them to win it all here, even if that isn't a popular pick, just because something, with COVID happening and the entire sports world being flipped on its head, it feels like this has been a year of new champions of, especially, as we're about to get into in regards to the NBA, a passing of the torch potentially. I kind of like Belgium's shot here to make a name for themselves. In the division of the bracket that you were talking about, though, Kayla, I think the Netherlands might be my pick.
Yeah, Chris,
over Denmark.
I was literally just about to mention, Kayla mentioned the right side of the bracket, and the Netherlands might be the hottest team in the whole tournament. I mean, they had scored 8 goals and only let up 2 in their 3 games in Group C.
There's something about this different environment just because of how the last couple of years went. Now everyone getting back together nationally to compete. It feels like some of these other squads really, really have a shot that might not normally have a shot. I think teams like Germany still look really good, but they're just like past their prime in a sense. I like some of the shots these other countries have in regards to this tournament. I'm excited to see how it ends, and I honestly do hope to see, and again, pun intended, out of left field, winner. I can't. I don't want to root for France anymore. I feel like they won, and I want to see an underdog come up and make a name for themselves heading into this, what seems to be the next era of the Euros, as some of these players get a little older that have been kind of owning this tournament for the last little bit.
Yeah, when you talk about the Netherlands, I think that this is a team that always plays well in international tournaments. I mean, they don't make it very far, but they do well in their groups, and they win a game or two in the knockout stages. So I'm not really surprised that they're playing this well, especially in the group they were in, which was very weak to say the least. But they've got like Memphis Depay is one of the best goal scorers right now. I mean, Wijnaldum is great in the midfield, and he scored in their most recent game. And the only thing that's a little unfortunate is they're missing their best defender, Virgil van Dijk. He's out with a leg injury, but I still think they're a formidable defense to be able to win games, especially on the bracket they're in. They really only maybe have to win one tougher game against a Germany or England team. That's not to say the games might not get out of their hands early on in the knockout stage and they can lose one, but talk about the dominant powerhouse teams, Germany and England would be the two. And England hasn't looked amazing to me offensively. So I really think Germany takes that one. So a Netherlands Germany game to go to the final, I totally see happening. And I think
I love
Netherlands
it.
squeak out a win.
Me too, man. I like the energy that these teams are. Some of these like smaller fish teams seem to be fired up, and I don't want to diminish the Netherlands, but I feel like in comparison to like a France or Germany, you're not treating them with the same like baseline talent level. It just I'd love to like Belgium or Netherlands or even Denmark. One of these squads just come out and grab the win. We're going to switch sports after this break, head from the grass to the ice. The New York Islanders saw their season come to a close, and Nassau Coliseum will be receiving a farewell here from us at WFUV. So stay tuned for a quick NHL segment and then some NBA content right after that. This has been One-on-One. Stay with us through this break.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back, everyone, to One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Chris Persianen, still here, taking you through the evening, now night, with Kayla Wenzel. We're here to talk now, after wrapping up our conversation regarding the Euro Championships, about the NHL. The New York Islanders played, and unfortunately for Long Island, lost a Game 7. The score was 1-0, and that in itself says a lot about what kind of Game 7 that was. We've heard a lot in the last couple of weeks from television networks that the two best words in sports are Game 7. A 1-0 loss though, might just be the most heartbreaking way besides I feel like a total blowout like the one the Islanders endured a couple games back. You get numb to the goals going in at some point. Their 8-0 loss. A 1-0 defeat is crushing.
I think that a blowout is better. I think it kind of makes you feel better because then it's like, well, there's nothing we could do. We were totally outmatched. Nothing could have stopped that. But 1-0 it's one mistake, it's one error, and it's one thing that didn't go right, and that ends it for you. And so for them, it was the shorthanded goal, I think, and so that was just something that they hadn't allowed all season. It was something that was devastating for them to have to endure, and it's just it's one of those things that's going to stick with them for a while. That one's going to linger, and that one's going to sting.
The team that they lost to too. So this is not the Islanders' first time going up against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And man, I feel like people wrote the Islanders out of the Boston series completely, framing it as if the Islanders somehow magically won the series. They would swiftly be crushed, but this team really, really, really showed what they've got and what they're made of just by making it to Game 7 against Tampa Bay. I think was a feat in itself, but to avoid having too much of a defeatist mentality, I do have to say that the shorthanded goal, like really after not, there was one team in the National Hockey League out of all the teams that all season long had not allowed a single shorthanded goal to enter their net. These guys were blocking a lot of rubber, and now they have the only goal scored in Game 7 come from their opponents on a shorthander. You can't write this stuff. You can't. You can't.
I mean, to the Tampa Bay Lightning, it is a devastating storyline. It is reminiscent of years past, and it sucks. It absolutely is heartbreaking. But like you said, we're trying not to be defeatist. We're trying to move forward, look ahead. And I mean, you have to be proud of them. You have to be proud of this Islanders team. I mean, Barry Trotz just led them with such grace and dignity. And you have to know that they were a really great team. And, you know, they weren't expected to be here. They were the 4th seed, you know, like this was super surprising in of itself to make it here. And I mean, Montreal, the Lightning will play Montreal, which was 18th placed in the league. So like, you would have loved to see that underdog matchup with the Islanders in Montreal, but you have to support the Islanders for where they ended up. You have to just give credit where credit is due to Barry Trotz. And I mean, he really put together a super incredible team. And it's just in those final moments where it counted, it did not gel. And sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles, right? That's how it goes occasionally. But it's devastating for them, but you have to be proud of them. You got to be proud of this team.
Absolutely. I think I almost want to zoom out here a little bit, as I like to say, and think about just why there is such a appearance, a downpour of disappointment just on the minds of Islanders fans. I think it's because this was their goodbye to Nassau Coliseum. You never want to come out of a Game 7 not advancing to the next round. But to come out of a Game 7, imagine being a fan walking out of Nassau knowing that is the last time you are walking out of that building to see an Islanders game. They lost 1-0 in Game 7. I feel for the fans, man. I feel y'all. I'm a Rangers guy myself. So my team a little more on the on the come up stage, but I gotta feel for Islanders fans, and I have to think that the organization will take this the right way. Take this as the stop of one path and the start of a new one. And I think they've got to definitely, or rather, they definitely have a gigantic opportunity next season to put the right foot forward and really get things going as a contender. As someone who, again, but save for basketball, roots for football too. Save for basketball and football. I can't stand the Jets. Roots for New York sports. I'm rooting for it.
Yeah, and for sure, it leaves you a bitter taste in your mouth leaving leaving the Coliseum like that. I mean, it was just they were out. The Islanders did not have a great offensive game in general. It was just the one shorthanded goal, but Tampa Bay outshot them 31-18. You know, the Islanders had no offensive traction in that game. They just weren't playing the same way. And so to have that as your final memory, to have that as something you're going to hold on to, I mean, it's bitter. That one sucks. It's going to sting for a really long time for fans. It's going to sting for the players. I think Matthew Barzal was crying in his interview afterwards. I mean, it's devastating for them. But like you said, I mean, our heart goes out to you, all you Islanders fans. But it also is, you take the good with the bad. You see that this was a season you probably didn't even expect to be at this point. You know what I mean? You probably did not anticipate that you were even going to make it to a game 7 with the Lightning right in the semifinals. So I think that that we have to zoom out and we have to look at it and we have to say that, okay, it's not the ending that New York Islanders fans wanted. It's not something that they'd like to see, but I mean, it was great watching them get there, and it was so much fun to have a team to root for in the hockey playoffs. I mean, that's not something that is always happening around here.
And the NHL playoffs are good. That's a good product, I gotta say. As someone who during regular seasons, I would say basketball, football, soccer, and then okay, yes, I'd rather watch. If I had to sit and watch an entire game, I'd rather watch the Rangers than the Mets, because my attention span for sitting down for a full Met, we'll see. Usually some breaks. However, I like watching the Mets more than the Rangers during the regular season. Playoff hockey, however, is a special atmosphere. I'd love one day, just it's been a thought of mine since I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I started just finding out that the Rangers even existed. Just as someone who I mentioned earlier, I'm half Finnish, and my dad has some hockey roots, so I've always wanted to see a playoff hockey environment. Just from how crazy they look on television, that's somewhere I want to be at. I remember being maybe 11-ish and seeing maybe 13, a little older, seeing the Rangers in the playoffs in Madison Square Garden. That might have been what made me fall in love with MSG, was the Rangers playoff environment, and then seeing how hard that crowd went for the Knicks in the regular season next year. Hockey playoffs are great. So even if the Islanders are out, I'm still going to be tuning in to the championship. The Stanley Cup is always a really, really good watch, and I think that shows in the numbers too. It usually has a pretty good draw audience wise. I love playoff hockey. I don't know about you.
No, I'll be honest. I am not necessarily a massive hockey fan. I don't always watch it, but I do watch playoff hockey. I do watch the Stanley Cup because I think that hockey is underrated as a sport. I think it almost is always overlooked. And I mean, especially the Islanders, they're one of the least talked about teams. I feel like when it comes to New York sports, everyone kind of overlooks them. And I'm guilty of that myself. But I think that you can't hate on the energy that Stanley Cup Finals brings, and you have to love watching that, because I think that the intensity. It goes for any sport, of course. I think the finals of any sport is going to be something that more people are going to watch, but especially
an intense environment. But it's hockey, man. There's something about, and to speak to the Islanders, I mean, like you were saying, absolutely not a sign to write off their future that they lost this game 7. So absolutely should be some greener pastures ahead for Isles fans as they head to Elmont, New York, to UBS Arena, the new home of the Islanders. I'm excited to maybe get out there at some point, see what that's like, because I find sports arenas fascinating. So that's a whole other segment of its own. But I have to wrap up this hockey segment with the explicit statement that it is absolutely disappointing that the Islanders lost, and it is absolutely not an indictment on their future as a team, because these guys put up a real fight. They've got a real good coach, and they're going to continue to be in conversations about potential contenders for the next couple seasons. I think hopefully the Rangers can join them. We can get a little rivalry going, because I think that would be pretty great for hockey. I think New York has a lot of fans that could tap into hockey, that would love it, that don't. And I think a bit of an LIRR series would be good for the sport. So I'm rooting for that. After this break here on One, we're going to be joined by Brian Mahoney to talk about the NBA. Very excited for this opportunity, chance to get to interview him. And after that, we'll have Mike Calamari back on the show, do a little headline segment, talk about some NBA news, and we'll wrap up with more basketball talk, talking about the playoffs, what's going on now, and of course, looking towards the NBA Finals. So Kayla Wenzel and I here after this break, we will be joined by Brian Mahoney. Stay with us.
One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
I'm Chris Persianen, joined by Kayla Wenzel, and we are honored to be joined now by Brian Mahoney. Brian, I can't even begin to try to introduce you fairly, but to give it a shot, NBA writer for the Associated Press, Knicks, Nets, USAB. We're so glad to have you on and to grab your perspective on both local teams and the playoffs. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It was a fun year locally this year with two playoff teams. We haven't had that too often in my years doing this.
It was a fun year for me as a Knicks fan. I'll admit it right off the bat that this was indeed one heck of a year for me. I almost want to just start right there, and to expand to both teams, just the city of New York. Basketball, those two things will be tied forever. What was special about this season, this year? The two playoff campaigns was what you've stated, but there was an energy as someone who was in the Bronx in the air this season that was different. How would you describe that?
There was, and obviously with everything that New York went through over the last year, just having something to kind of celebrate. And the Nets were going to be good all along. I think people knew that. But the Knicks was a complete surprise. None of us saw that coming. And, when they were able to open up to having crowds again and then expand the crowds in time for the playoffs, game one of the Knicks series was one of the best atmospheres I've ever been in. Just such a joy, people being out again, people seeing the Knicks in the playoffs again. You had chills just being there. It was really something.
Yeah, the energy in New York is certainly getting better. It's getting back to normal. It feels like things are starting to come back. So just keeping it local with the Knicks and the Nets, what are some specific things? I know this is obviously very early, but what are some specific things that you'd like to see them be doing in the off season to prepare for next season? I mean, it was a successful year for both of them. I mean, they're not in the finals, but I would say largely considered, it's been a really great year for them. So what are some things you want to see them do to continue to improve on that?
Yeah, I mean, they both kind of know what they need to do. I think the Knicks challenge is a little bit harder. The Knicks need to get another star type player. I think we saw that in the playoff series. When Atlanta was able to contain Julius Randle, they didn't have that second guy who could step up. There's going to be players out there, but those are hard to get. The Nets, of course, have their superstars. They just have to fill out the bench around them. We saw in the playoffs when Harden was hurt and Kyrie Irving was hurt, there wasn't a lot of stuff around. Kevin Durant, they need to kind of find guys who Steve Nash is confident in off the bench. And plenty of guys will want to come play with those guys, so they should be able to do that.
Again, I mentioned I was a Knick fan, but I will ask a question about our friends in Brooklyn. Do you think that watching this Clippers team right now, watching the chemistry-related struggles that this squad had last year, kind of maybe as a facet of being a, hey, Kawhi and Paul George, go do stuff team? Did you kind of notice that this year with Brooklyn? Did you think that there was a lack of work experience factor in terms of just these guys sharing an office space together?
It's a challenge in the same way it was for the Clippers last year, in that this was such a weird season. You didn't have the full time to get to know each other, to get to now. Obviously, these guys have a relationship. Kevin Durant and James Harden played together. Durant and Kyrie are friends. They played in the Olympics together. They do have that, but you don't have the course of the whole season to go through road trips and go out. You couldn't go to dinners together, all that kind of stuff where you can, get all the other guys included with you. So certainly we saw it happen to the Clippers last year. It's a good point. And we saw it happen to the Nets here. There's only so much you can do on a basketball court. There's all the other stuff that goes into it that they lost time to do.
Right. And so kind of keeping within NBA playoffs, yesterday, the Bucks defeated the Hawks. What are your thoughts on this series? How do you see this kind of continuing to shape out? And the Bucks beat the Nets. So my mom always told me to root for the person that beat you. So are you hoping that the Bucks pull it out over the Hawks, or what are your feelings about this?
That's always been tough advice. Sometimes mom's right. Sometimes I don't know on that one. But I think the Bucks are the better team. I think they're just so big up front, obviously with Giannis and then Brook Lopez up there, and they don't always defend great. Sometimes I think they rely on their offense a little too much. They were the highest scoring team in the league. But, when they lock in like they did last night, I think they can take away a lot of Atlanta's stuff. And I think they should win that series. When Giannis goes to the basket the way he did, there's no stopping him anywhere in the league. So if they play smart and play the right way, they should win that series. But Atlanta, look, they won on the road in New York. They did it in Philadelphia. We shouldn't rule this team out. They were the best team in the East record-wise for a lot of the season after March when they made the coaching change. So it's a good team right there. But I think the Bucks are a little better.
Kind of a two-parter here. I'll start and say I'm definitely rooting for Milwaukee as a fan of a team that was defeated by Atlanta. Can't stand Trae Young, so I might have to disagree with your mom there, Kayla. I want to ask first about the four teams that are remaining. Which of the four kind of feels to you like this year's champion? And then wanted to ask about how the fact that there's no LeBron, there's no KD, there's no Steph, and, unfortunately, no Kawhi. This playoffs has kind of felt like a passing of the torch playoffs from the LeBron, KD, Curry generation to Spida, Booker, Tatum. Zion didn't make it, but those are his guys his age. Are you feeling that passing of the torch vibe as well?
It'll be interesting because you want to say in some aspects it feels like that, but then you have to sort of say LeBron won't make it back, and it's to me a little early to rule him out. But at the same time, yes, you can kind of see like this is some of these guys' time. Like you say, you look at a Devin Booker and you look at a Trae Young who wasn't in the playoffs before, and all of a sudden, Ayton is having a great playoffs. All these guys who are in the, between 25 and 30 years old, are kind of making a great breakthrough. So I hope it continues. We need more fans to get to know these guys and see how great they are. But as far as your first question, I think Milwaukee has a profile of that kind of team where they had kind of the heartbreak 2 years in a row, having the best record in the league, not getting to the finals, and then they sort of upgrade their team a little bit. They make the trade for Drew Holiday, sort of to be their last piece. So if you had to look at kind of who fits the profile of the teams left, this is their year. Milwaukee seems to be the one I would pick of those four.
Right. Following along with Milwaukee, I got to know about Giannis. We have debates on this very show on One Nightly on Wednesdays about whether Giannis is, to use my favorite terms, a Batman or a Robin. I've got to know your thoughts because the Anthony Davis fan club was telling me for a while that AD was a better player. I was like, but now Giannis struggled. What do you make of Giannis? What do you make of his role, his skill that people like to debate? Just the two-time MVP is a little more controversial than your average two-time MVP, I think.
I think he is a Batman, and I think he cares enough to improve. Like Giannis could just play the same game he has now for the rest of his career and average 20 and 10 and have a good record and all that stuff. He's just that good athletically. But I think he wants to improve his shooting. I think he wants to become a better teammate, a better playmaker, all that stuff. He just seems to be that kind of guy to me. And there are some guys, who don't. There are some guys who, what they are now, they're fine being that. They get a lot of money and they, get a lot of success and a lot of fanfare and all that. So that's fine for them, but I just don't think Giannis is that kind of guy, and I think it will pay off for him as his career goes on.
Right, and kind of moving over now into the Suns-Clippers series, who do you think is better out of that series? So Chris Paul just came back. He had a bit of a lackluster performance the other day. So who do you think is going to come out victorious within those two?
I think the Suns are in better shape in a lot of reasons, obviously with Kawhi not being there. The Clippers also don't have Serge Ibaka's hurt, who would have been very important in the series. I think playing against DeAndre Ayton for Phoenix, who's playing, I think, the best basketball of his career in these playoffs. So the Suns, I think, have a lot going for them. With now, the Chris Paul thing was bad timing, but they won those two games when he was out, which was important. So assuming, Devin Booker is okay with the nose and, shakes off that bad game the other night, Chris Paul gets back, in good condition after being out, I think there's a lot more to like about the Suns. Can't rule out the Clippers. We've seen them come back from 0-2, 2 rounds in a row. So they're certainly confident. But overall situation right now, I think the Suns have more going for them.
Absolutely. I wanted to get a little towards the off season before we look towards wrapping up here. The Knicks and the Nets, we mentioned their off-season strategies. There's a team in the Atlantic Division, though, who came to mind, not to name names, but you were making a point about types of players, and someone on a 5-year, $158 million extension wearing red, white, and blue came right to mind. Do you think Ben Simmons is on the move this offseason?
Very perceptive, Chris. Yes, that's exactly the kind of player we're talking about. Look, Ben Simmons is fine the way he is, but does he want to be better? And if he does, he can fix that stuff. But, I think they have to listen to offers, which, they're going to say listen to offers every time, no matter who the player is. Everybody can be traded. But the key is not to just give him away now, not to say, oh, my gosh, he was terrible. We got to get rid of him. He's still an elite player. Just a flawed player. And if they get a great deal for him, you move him. But if you don't, you say, okay, well, we just have to hope that he wants to address his issues and really put the time in and work. And if he does, look, he's already an all-star player and an awesome defensive player, plays on the fast break, fantastic. And, he's got to fix one thing. It's just a matter of it's a lot of time in the gym to do that. And is he that guy to do it?
I think Daryl Morey is asking himself a lot of the same questions that you just posed right now, because that's a lot of money to be paying while you are finding out the answer to those questions. I've got to throw this in one more geographically seemingly random direction. We're going to bring it all the way down south now. Dallas, Texas, the home of I'm going to be frank. For me, happily, a lot of chaos. As a fan of the team that owns 2 of their first-round picks, I have to be honest and say that all this fallout is popcorn material for me. But with bringing in Harrison, Kidd, these new moves, this new look Mavs team, trying to appease Luka Doncic, what do you make of this situation in Dallas? I mean, it's just complicated, to say the least.
It's been surprising as an outsider. Maybe people who were around the team saw some of this coming, but obviously I did not. They've been, stability for such a long time. Rick Carlisle had been there forever, Donnie Nelson forever, and to see him go within days of each other is really strange. And look, they have obviously a superstar in Luka, and Jason Kidd, I think, is shown to be a good coach in the NBA and should address some of their issues defensively, maybe, but all kind of weird. And, eventually maybe we find out why all this is happening so suddenly. But in the meantime, you just kind of hope for their sake they can steer it through. But if you're looking for chaos in Dallas, as you are, you certainly got it right now.
The coaching market, even with Kidd off of it, is really full still. I feel like of candidates who have paid their dues as assistants or who are qualified enough. With Chauncey Billups going to Portland, it seems Rick Carlisle going to the Pacers, the market's been, like Kidd, having some top candidates plucked from it. Who are some of your favorite remaining coaching candidates, just as a little nod to our off-season segment later in the show, for the available positions?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned Mike D'Antoni. I would certainly, as two-time coach of the year, a guy like that, I would certainly want to bring in. And, staying with the Nets, Jacques Vaughn, I think, did a great job at the end of last season when he took over. He's been a head coach before, and it wasn't on a talented team in Orlando, but he showed last year, I think, how good a coach he is. So this is, like I say, there's so many openings this year. There's a nice mix of, guys who have coached before, who are out there, and also guys who, first time get their shot, like Boston is doing. When the quarter of the league essentially has jobs, there's going to be great opportunities. And, some of these, Indiana made a bad move last year. You would think this year's going to be better bringing in Rick Carlisle. And if it is, that's a talented team. But coach makes a big difference, obviously, an understatement there.
Right.
Yeah, I think I might advise our betting listeners to look at some Pacers playoff odds, because I can't see Carlisle going out like that. I liked him for the Bucks job, and I'm curious to hear as well a final thought about Coach Budenholzer and whether you think they should replace him, just because we've talked so much Giannis. But I did like this coaching market, and I think there are still some good candidates available too, as you mentioned, Vanderpool, Mosley, some good guys around the league. But before we wrap up, Coach Bud, Brian, if you're Milwaukee, are you done with him?
I would not be. You're still talking about, no matter what happens in this series, 2 Eastern Conference Finals in the last 3 years. That's saying something. But the flip side is, again, just same with the Dallas. We're not around them every day. You don't know how are the players relating to the coach, all that kind of thing. And, sometimes no matter how much the team is winning or losing, that stuff gets fractured somehow. You don't really know. But if they had gone out early, then it seemed like it was definite he was going to be gone based on all the rumors. Now, you certainly think, you got a good reason if you're going to make the move. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in this round here if they don't make it.
Yeah, he might have earned his stay another year. We'll have to see. We'll see how the NBA playoffs wrap up. I like the Bucks to win as well, Brian. I think Giannis has something to prove to us as viewers. And that's about it for me, because that narrative is strong enough, as you were saying about Giannis's work ethic, to be it for me. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, either way, we're going to get a great story. Like if it's the Bucks against the Suns, the Suns finally getting there, Chris Paul finally getting a shot. If it's the Clippers finally getting their finals chance. I mean, and if it's Atlanta, same thing, a team that hasn't been in the finals in whatever it is, 50 years. So, no matter what, we're going to get a great story, and hopefully the fans will tune in, because it's not, as we said earlier, the guys they're used to seeing, but these are guys who are going to be fun to watch, I think, whoever it turns out to be.
Absolutely. And for the next decade plus, this is going to be good. I'm excited as a basketball fan. Brian, we thank you a million for taking the time to join us on today's show. It was nothing short of fantastic to pick your brain, grab your perspectives on everything going on. We really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks for having me. I love chatting with you guys.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One, everyone. There's been a lot of talks in the NBA as playoffs are remaining in full swing, but we're going to get into some stuff outside of the playoffs. There have been a flurry of head coach positions open and just now have begun to start to close. There have been 3 head coaching hires that have been made so far. The Celtics have hired Ime Udoka. The Pacers have picked up Rick Carlisle after his departure from the Mavericks. And the Mavericks have now replaced Carlisle by reaching an agreement with Jason Kidd to be their next head coach. So we are 3 down and we've got a couple left to go. The Portland's still looking for a coach. The Magic are still looking for a coach. So there's still room for coaching hires. But Chris, I want to get your reaction on the ones that have been made so far. Which one do you like the best? Maybe which one that intrigued you? What are your thoughts?
Man, this has got to be tough. I mean, also with talks heating up of Chauncey Billups potentially heading over to Portland to potentially lead Damian Lillard and that squad next year. I got to say that the Pacers hiring Carlisle, I think, is my favorite. Carlisle is someone who on my own podcast I thought might shake loose after this season. And I really liked Milwaukee as a landing spot for him because my opinion on Carlisle is that you hire him at this point to solve some problems for you. And I mean that in the sense that he's a veteran coach who has won a championship, who can clearly coach, and who, despite his age and experience in the league, starting to maybe get to the amount of years where people say, is this going to be wrapping up? I think Carlisle leaving showed that he didn't want underachieving with Luka to be what he went down for at the end. He wanted to go somewhere where he could go solve some problems and show his stuff as a coach. Like, look at Tom Thibodeau. He just went to New York, took a scrap pile and prepared a beautiful apple pie. So he's getting commendation all around the sports world for that. He was just interviewed the other day at the draft combine. His reputation in the coaching world is sky high because of what he just did with the Knicks. I think Carlisle maybe wasn't looking for a real rebuilding squad, but I think a team like Indiana with pieces that exist that can definitely play back. You got TJ Warren, you got Karis LeVert, Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner. I mean, there are players in Indiana that are good. This is not no man's land talent-wise. For Carlisle to be the guy getting to now step into the driver's seat, see where he can take this thing, I think that's a pretty good match, man. I got to say, especially out of the available candidates, if that's the direction that the Pacers want to go in, which is just building towards the future, trying to win, trying to build something, an authentic culture, just the opposite of what happened with Nate Bjorkgren last season. I like the Carlisle pick a fair amount for them. You know, I thought he might go to Milwaukee and try to fix up the Giannis situation, but with Budenholzer looking like he might stay there, it's hard to think off the top of my head of a better fit than Indiana for him, especially as a former coach there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they know what they're getting into with him. He's disciplined, he's old school, and I think that that's going to work for their style of veteran players. I think that it's going to fit in well with them. But I also do like the Udoka hire to Celtics. I think that
Yep.
is a really exciting one. It's his first head coaching job. He's only like 44, 43, something like that. So he's kind of on the younger side. But I think that especially with Brad Stevens now moving up to the president position there, I think that he is like uniquely qualified to know what he wants in a head coach. And I think that he made a great pick. I think that Udoka, he always was a defense type player first when he was in the NBA, which he was for a really long time. And then I think that his defensive style and that sort of thought process that he brings into his coaching, he's been an assistant coach for a variety of teams for a couple of years now. And I think that that sort of defensive first mindset is going to be really fruitful to the Celtics. And I think that it's something that they're definitely going to benefit from greatly through his experience and through his knowledge. And he's made a really good impression with the team. I think he coached them in like a World Cup. And so I think that he had a lot of good bonds with the team and with the players. And so I think that his knowledge, his experience, but also his young, kind of more energetic vibe is going to be something that is going to benefit the Celtics in a very like important way and understated way. I mean, the energy of a coach is something that the connections that they have with the players can be sometimes more fruitful or more like detrimental if they're not right. So they may have all the know-how, but if they don't have relationships, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But he does have relationships already with like Marcus Smart and Jason Tatum. So I think that he's going to fit in nicely within that organization.
Yeah. Not to overcredit, another coach for Udoka's own accomplishments, but he does come from the Popovich coaching tree. Right. This is a debated coaching tree, to say the least. There are a lot of famous ones in NBA history, perhaps Holzman being the tree to follow throughout the decades, but Popovich has had some controversial results as his assistants turn into lead, not just guys, but talking about Becky Hammon as well, lead head coaches. Hammon was one of my favorite candidates for the Knicks back when they had their vacancy. I thought if they were going more a long-term route, Hammon would actually be a really cool pick for them. But if they were going a short-term route, I did endorse Thibodeau, and that was the objective. So they went that way, and Hammon didn't come over to New York. I think, though, this member, this apple of the pop tree should be a good one. Budenholzer, some debates, but a pretty successful career. I think Udoka will fall more on his side. This guy's got it, man. He has the it factor that a coach needs when, like, people forget that I am people, by the way. I include myself in people. that NBA players are all people and that the coaches are people too, and that this is like their job that they show up to. Like they go to work and this is their work, and their coach is kind of their boss in a sense. Like you've really got to be able to reach your locker room. Bjorkgren was a hire that I really liked for Indiana at first. I'll say it. I did. I really liked the Bjorkgren hire, and it's because I thought that his mastery of an NBA playbook like was really commendable. Like that guy can run a freaking offense. The plays were really, really intelligently drawn. They used the members of the team like in their best ways. I thought Bjorkgren did a good job trying to get his talent out there in the best way possible for them. And then we find out that behind the scenes, they all hate the guy. That's not going to work. It won't. It won't. Whether he's putting them in great positions or not, if they think he stinks, he stinks. And that's because no matter how good you are as a coach, if you're unable to have control of your locker room, you will fail at your job. David Fizdale worked his way up the coaching tree, showed up to New York City with an empty clipboard in hand, and failed miserably really, really fast because guys were not buying into what he was selling. A guy like Udoka, who has been around winning organizations for years, I've got to agree with you, is going to be able to come in and reach these guys in the right way.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the Udoka hire. I think it's a really good move. And you mentioned Popovich coaching tree. He's also there for the 2014 championship. So he has that championship DNA, you can say. And
yep,
gotta hope he brings that to Boston, to this younger group that maybe could be inspired by a guy who's been there championship wise, but he's also young and connect to them on that level. And talking about another young coach, I want to get to this, Chris. I know you got a lot of feelings regarding to this hire, but Jason Kidd, I mean, it's hard not to be mixed or split over this coaching decision. He has had coaching history in Milwaukee where he spent 4 seasons there and was cut loose mid-season.
I wonder how Jason Kidd would look if he ever had a chance to have a foreign generational talent on his team. I feel like that's an opportunity that he's just never been given before now with, he had and totally ruined Giannis Antetokounmpo for several seasons. If you watch Giannis Antetokounmpo shoot a basketball and tell me that watch his rookie year jump shot, then watch his sophomore year jump shot, and then watch his jump shot now and tell me that Jason Kidd did not totally screw this kid. Well, he didn't know any better coming over, and he thought Kidd was a great coach. There was a report that he found out really quick once they replaced Kidd that Kidd was not the great coach that he thought he was, that it was literally because he didn't know better because he was from another country that he thought Kidd was going to be so great because he was a great NBA point guard.
I just think the thing with Kidd is that he was hired by Los Angeles as an assistant, partly for
associate head coach. I think more than assistant
development. So I think that he has a history in that field, like developing players, and I think you can certainly say that he helped Giannis get to the next level. You talk about the shooting, but I don't think shooting is entirely based on coaching. I mean, look at Ben Simmons in Philadelphia. I mean, Doc Rivers is a great coach, but he can't just take the ball from Ben Simmons' hands and take some free throws. I mean, there's a lot that goes into shooting outside the coaching. Now, that being said, I'm not the biggest fan of this Jason Kidd hire either. I mean, he's 183 and 190 as a head coach, 9-15 in the playoffs. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said about, does he have the experience to take this team to the next level? And if the clubhouse likes him, if he can get the guys together, that's one thing, but it's another thing just going out there and winning a game. And that takes an experienced head coach who really knows what they're doing. So I think he's worked well as an assistant, but there's nothing that I've seen from him that convinces me that he's ready for this Dallas Mavericks head coaching job.
Yeah, and that's a big if, like if the players like him and if the clubhouse like rallies around him. He's not known necessarily to have great relationships with players. He's known to be pretty demanding and not necessarily to kind of cultivate a great culture. So I
got cut loose in Brooklyn, that exact reason. Yeah.
Exactly.
I got a hot take off.
Sure, Chris.
Jason Kidd's best move as a coach was having one of his players spill his drink to buy him extra time to draw up a play.
That's so embarrassing for him. Like, that is a terrible, that is so bad.
It was smart. It was really smart.
But it's also like,
And it is his best move as a coach to this
you
date.
know what I mean? Like,
He needed extra time to draw up a play. He
I
spilled
know,
some ice all over the ground. And that is, to this date, his smartest move as an NBA head coach. Now, am I writing off the Dallas Mavericks? Absolutely not. And I have to make that clear, because when you have Luka Doncic as part of your organization, you are not to be written off. However, there are a lot of teams with a lot of great talent who make it really, really far in the playoffs, and then they get beat. And why? And the team was outplayed. They were outcoached, whatever it was. It's possible for a team like the Heat with a coach like Eric Spoelstra to make runs in the bubble like they did when they have the consistency that comes from having a great coach. I think coaching matters a lot in the end. I think the most in the NFL, coaching might matter out of the major sports leagues here in America, but it's really important in all of them. And in the NBA, if Kidd is just good and not even a great coach, I think that has potential. Even if the Mavericks can quell some of their roster issues, like how Cuban said, they totally need to find a number 2 scorer because they don't have one on the roster. And everyone's like, hey, what about Kristaps? He's like, oh, well, Kristaps is what he is. And it's like, no, you traded for him to be the number 2 scorer. He's not good enough for that. Now you're scrambling because you have Luka Doncic and you've put less help around him than the Hawks did around Trae Young, who's not even as good. That's not a slight against Trae Young. He just beat the crap out of my Knicks in the playoffs. He beat the crap out of the Sixers and just handed it to the Bucks in game 1, despite the game 2 loss. Like, Trae Young is balling out right now. Luka Doncic is better at basketball than him and is getting less help from his team to win now. I don't understand it. And I think that when you have a coach like Carlisle in the building and let him go for a Nike executive to run your team and for Jason Kidd to coach it, it's a sign that things may not be going exactly how you want. And with Luka Doncic gearing up to sign a $200 million extension, Dallas, I'm not afraid to say it, has already blown their best shot at a championship. They've done it because when Luka Doncic is this good on his rookie deal, you have a chance to win a ring with him as your offensive engine as soon as this year. You failed to put a roster around him that was as talented as the 5th seed in the East. And you're now struggling with the results. It's tough to feel bad for the Mavericks here. They thought they could put Luka on cruise control and head to some Western Conference finals. And the league doesn't work like that. So you have your guy, you have faith in him, you have to do right by him and assemble the best team around him that you can. I think, in my opinion, hiring Jason Kidd is already a step in the wrong direction, especially when Luka Doncic's own pick for head coach is on your team and you don't choose him. Jamal Mosley is the coach that Luka Doncic has worked one-on-one with pregame every single game since being drafted. And he was his choice for head coach, and they did not hire him. This, unfortunately, joins a long list of Black assistants being passed over for white head coaches, despite having paid their dues with that organization. David Vanterpool in Minnesota, the penultimate example with the hiring of Chris Finch. I think that there are a lot of things wrong here in Dallas, that this isn't the first time that this has been said. You know, like 10 years ago when people were like, hey, Mavericks organization might not be all that. And then, like, those problems are all still there. We just haven't talked about them because they haven't been good. Now they're good again. Now they have a Luka, and they're doing wrong by him. I mean, I can't co-sign any of this stuff from Dallas. I do thank them, though, for taking on those contracts for the 2 first-round picks and for the protection on the 2023 pick that they're about to have to lift. Because if they want to trade for anyone to help Luka, the Knicks currently have them in a corner due to those pick protections. They've put themselves in a terrible spot. The Mavericks have. They're where the Bucks were last year. The Bucks got conned into sending 5 first-round picks for Drew Holiday because they had to put win now, help now around Giannis. The Mavericks have inserted themselves into the same position. They will be doing something to their team this offseason, hopefully to make it better. And I think if that's your outlook when you have a top player in the world, you're not in a great spot.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting point. It's going to be even more interesting to see what Dallas does next year with Jason Kidd at the helm. But I want to end this headline segment with one more thing that happened this week. Tuesday night was the NBA draft lottery, and we saw the Detroit Pistons claim the first overall pick in the draft. The rest of the top 5 filled out with the Rockets and Cavaliers at 2 and 3, and then the Raptors and Magic at 4 and 5, respectively. So, Kayla, I want to go to you. What was one thing that surprised you about the draft? Do you see any teams going in a particular direction, or is there any idea how the draft will play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always find that the NBA draft lottery is very interesting. I think that that's like just a unique way of choosing draft orders. That always strikes me as odd. Every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, this is so interesting to me that this is how it goes. I think that with the Pistons taking getting first draft spot, I think that they're going to probably go for Cade Cunningham. I mean, I don't think that there's anything else that they're probably going to do there. It's interesting. We talked a little bit with Brian Mahoney about some certain trade things, and we talked about the Knicks, how they have a couple of first round picks, and a possibility that they might be doing there is trying to like package those and using that for capital to trade for a veteran player instead of getting like 2-3 new rookies. And so that might be something that is in their favor, as they kind of need a big veteran player to get on their roster, and they kind of need a big name, I think, to help build them out a little bit. And so I think that it'll be interesting to watch the Knicks to see if they actually they actually try to like draft in all of these spots, or if they rather would package them and trade the picks to somebody else to receive like a stronger player. So I think that there's a lot that's interesting to go on there. Like you said, Pistons first, Rockets second, Cavs third, Raptors fourth, and Magic fifth. So I think that there obviously are great players that are going to go. And I think that as a New York show, like, we're really going to pay attention to what are the Knicks going to do with their picks, because I think that the other guys, they'll be interesting to watch, of course, but the Knicks need something bigger.
Absolutely. My favorites at the top of the draft: Cunningham, Mobley, Green, probably my 3 favorite players from this draft class. Those guys are going to be really good. They're going to go probably in the first 3 picks. Once guys like, Jalen Suggs, Scotty Barnes, Jonathan Kuminga start to get selected, we get into potential Knicks range. Tom Thibodeau at the draft combine, I mentioned he was interviewed. What he actually said was that the team is looking for wings. The team is looking for guys who can shoot. The team is looking for guys who can shoot off the dribble, and that the team is looking into moving up, moving down, and moving out, as well as staying in their picks. The most beautiful Tom Thibodeau non-answer answer that I think was possible. However, wings, guys that can shoot and guys that can shoot off the dribble, to me screams Trey Mann, screams Trey Murphy III from Virginia, screams James Bouknight from UConn, a Brooklynite himself. He said he made sure in his interview with the Knicks to let them know where he was from. So despite Kevin Durant's comments that the Knicks aren't cool anymore, it seems that the best young talent coming out of college really, really wants to play for them. So sorry, Kevin, but might have been a bit off there. I think the Knicks, as Kayla was saying, they have a lot of routes they can go, but they need to look towards improving this roster. I would think that they obviously do look into moving up. They look into moving. Something tells me that there's going to be a name on the Knicks next year. Even if not a gigantic, superstar, they're going to go out and get someone, because when you saw what happened in the playoffs, when it took the second half of game 2 going well to show us that Reggie Bullock isn't a number 2 guy, and that it takes Randall really, really heating up to turn him on as a shooter, that you need another playmaker on the court. It's a real need for the team to have somebody else on the floor with Julius Randle, who the other defense is scared of having the basketball. Right now, the Knicks don't have that guy. That's okay. But I do think that they need to look towards getting him, even if it's only temporary, a la Colin Sexton. There's going to be names like that floating around. The bigger name that I have to float out here with some WFUV original reporting is that Bradley Beal is a name that is apparently not out the window. So that's what I'm hearing as of late. We know from during the season reporting that even if against the NBA's tampering guidelines, Sir William Wesley was initiating some contact with the Beal camp, just because it stopped getting reported about, don't think that stopped. Yeah, Bradley Beal is apparently the name to watch out for. And if they're talking a big acquisition, I think Bradley Beal seems to be the dark horse option. And that would be super controversial among Knicks fans. But, again, as Kayla was saying, team needs to keep moving forward and upward. Got to get someone next to Randall who can put pressure on the defense, and that would do that for sure. So am I okay giving up a lot for – no, I'd probably rather go after a Gilgeous-Alexander or player like that, but Beal would be special in New York as well. Mike, we're keeping you on to talk NBA playoff updates now. We're going to get right into it and get right into these final four teams contending for the ring. I want to start with you, Mike. How do you feel about these two conference finals?
Yeah, I think they've been, really great watches, both of these conference finals. I think the West has been a little lopsided, at least at first, obviously with the Suns taking the first two games without CP3. And then you get CP3 back cold, and you get Devin Booker with the mask. So the Clippers able to steal game 3. And I guess that adds a little more to the story. But what I want to see out of game 4 is PG show up again. And that's always been the story with the Clippers. Without Kawhi, who's ruled out now for game 4, what kind of PG are we going to get? Are we going to get playoff P or pandemic P? Which one are we going to see in game 4? And that's really the story
playoff
with
P.
This whole Western Conference so far. And if Paul George can put up a 30 spot or more, then I see the Clippers getting another win. But if that doesn't happen, the Suns are too deep. They're too good. Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton. I don't see them really eclipsing the Clippers. I don't see the Clippers eclipsing the Sun team, and I think they can walk through to the finals if we don't see the Paul George that we've seen at times in this playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I think that my money's on the Suns if I'm taking a pick. I think that the Suns are deeper than the Clippers. I think that the Suns I've seen them perform better than I've seen the Clippers perform. And so I think that I personally am going to choose the Suns over the Clippers. Kind of talking Bucks and Hawks. I have a sour taste in my mouth about the Hawks, obviously, from the Sixers, but I still am going to pick them. I find the Hawks, I think that they have an energy that is, I don't know, Trae Young's energy is crazy and I don't like it. But I would say that it's definitely something that can invigorate his whole team. And I think that we saw them, even though they lost game 2, we saw them lost game 2 in Philly and they still came back and won the whole series. So I kind of am feeling like the Hawks have a lot of mojo. I don't know. Maybe that's, again, not another word. I don't know. But I feel like they have like a lot of momentum with them.
Swagger. Go
Swagger,
ahead.
I
And
don't know. I feel like they're
Trae Young is that villain, man. Go ahead and give him those props. If you've seen the clip, to bring a very Gen Z perspective to one-on-one, there is a clip being very frequently used on my TikTok For You page, because mine is full of a bunch of sports clips, of guys going out and making videos like of social scenarios in which they're a villain, maybe not wanting to eat something simple, and it'll cut to Trae Young looking back at the Garden crowd. I was there that night at Game 5. There was a chant going on that cannot be repeated on air, and Trae Young looks back and he sees I want to say he looked at one side of MSG. So he looked at about 11,000 New Yorkers yelling his name, accompanied by an expletive of choice. And he looked back and flashed them the most devilish smile you could imagine. And as much as I hated that moment, that picture is art. And I won't deny it.
Yeah, I think Trae Young definitely brings that to the table, and it's really funny with this Hawks teams. I mean, me and the producer Alex Wolves have been texting frequently throughout the playoffs, and we're always like, enough of this Hawks team. And I think that's what everyone's feeling like. At a certain point, they just got to go away. They're just keep on at it, where it's like they hit big threes in big moments, and every night you feel another person steps up, whether it's Bogdanovich or Herter or Trae Young dropping 30 plus, or Clint Capella on the pick and roll. I mean, they're relentless, and they really make you pay when you don't break away late in the game. They'll hit threes, they'll stop runs, and they can close games. So I don't think this series is certainly over by any means. I mean, the Bucks just need to play well, and that's really been a question mark for this team. Are they going to show up every night? And that hasn't been the story throughout the playoffs. So if you get Giannis at his best, and you get Chris Middleton making shots and Drew Holiday playing both ends of the floor well, then the Bucks are going to win. But if they don't, the Hawks aren't going to lose the series. The Bucks are going to have to win it, and I think that's the biggest thing with this Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, I like the way that you phrase that too. Like that the Bucks have to win it. That Hawks aren't going to lose. They're, like you said, they're not going away. They're kind of like, I don't know. They're like a infection or something. I don't know. Maybe that's gross.
No, I think it's fitting though, because Trae is so small and he talks so much. It's too lovingly. I'll have to cover my dog's ears so that he doesn't see this as too much of an insult. But he's Trae Young's being a bit of a chihuahua, if you want to use that term. Small, noisy, perhaps barking up trees that you might think he has no business barking up. But man, is he taking down? You kidding me? He didn't play any animal teams. I couldn't have no puns for me to use. He couldn't have played like the Bears or something, so I could say he took down. That's not even a team in the NBA, man. Totally ruined my pun, Trae Young. You should have beat different teams in the playoffs. But if you do manage to size up and take down the Bucks, I will be quite impressed. Not the same. I needed a more fighting animal. Not the same. Pun ruined by Trae Young.
You're not doing great.
However, the Hawks are doing great, and I mentioned them earlier in regards to the Mavericks positively, right? Like that draft night trade is pretty interesting to revisit. I think Trae Young and Reddish for Doncic. Atlanta has certainly made it look like they're winning that deal so far, and because of how much better Luka Doncic is than Trae Young, in my opinion, that is both a positive sign for Atlanta's front office, a negative sign for Dallas's front office. I think Atlanta's got to be really happy with where they are. I do see Milwaukee winning the series, but I just went on that little Hawks praise tangent to say, similar to our Islanders take, Kayla, they're down, but they're not out. These guys are going to be back.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody feels the same way, but this has been a definitely weird NBA playoffs. I think the bubble was also a little weird, but this one,
we talked about it with Brian Mahoney, the passing of the torch.
There's no
feature.
LeBron, no KD. Obviously, Giannis is here, but he's still one of those young guys. Usually you see like a Harden, a Curry, and Chris Paul is one of those older guys, but these are guys that you don't usually see at this late in the season. So, and even those ESPN stats, we're going to get a champion that hasn't won since like prior to the merger. So all those things are really, really interesting. And they're going to be droughts that are ended whatever team wins. And that's probably the most interesting thing to see what happens here, is that this is an unusual NBA playoffs, but it gives more guys who don't usually get the spotlight a chance to prove themselves and show that they're really elite players.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
agree. I think that this is going to be, I mean, like you said, like, and Chris Paul's an older guy, and so I'm happy that he's getting a shot here because he hasn't really seen that before.
His career has kind of been riddled with the hypotheticals up until now.
Yeah,
like what if he didn't get hurt? What if they didn't veto the trade? What if they, I've always liked CP3. It's nice to see him here. I'm with you.
And then he missed the first two, and it's like, and then he came back, and then he wasn't playing that good. So we'll really have to see. I mean, I hope that for his sake, kind of, that the Suns pull it together. And so this way he just actually gets his opportunity, gets to have his real shot.
Yeah, and it's also, this is an entire playoffs that have been riddled with injuries. Obviously, the CP3 is not injury related technically,
Right?
But
you get bonus points for that word, creating that word on the spot. That is,
thank you. But
that you get bonus points.
That's word all night.
Yeah, the Kawhi injury really could determine the entire playoffs. I mean, if the Clippers have Kawhi, they've got potentially the two best two-way players, and besides Giannis potentially, but two of the three best two-way players remaining in this playoffs, and that completely changes the scope of the series. I don't think Kawhi is coming back anytime soon, so it's really going to be up to playoff P or pandemic P, like I said earlier. But it's going to be up to Paul George to determine that the fate of the Clippers in the West. And if it's a Suns-Bucks series in the finals, which I think is a lot of people are thinking, that's going to be really interesting which way that goes, because it's two teams that we would never have predicted to be in the finals, at least a couple years ago.
Yeah, I like it, though. I like it. Like I said, we talked about this a little bit with Brian Mahoney earlier in the show when we got to talk some hoops with him. Kayla and I were speaking with him about how there's this new generation coming up. Now you got Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, Devin Booker, and then not in the playoffs, Ja Morant, Zion Williamson, LaMelo Ball, Cade Cunningham going to be coming into the league. I'm of the opinion that we didn't get too far into the draft, but my Cade take is that if he's as good as I think he can be, the Pistons might be a year one playoff, like not like playoff contender, but a playoff spot. I really think the Pistons have a chance to make the playoffs next year because they had a home run draft last draft. I said this. I didn't even realize that I said this. Now I'm gonna come out and say that I said this so I can say that I said it before the draft lottery and throughout the season. I totally forgot about this. Hold on. Let me pat myself on the back here. I said that if the Pistons were to land a top 1 or 2 pick in this draft, that their previous draft would be nothing short of like a 100% on the test, like an A+. Because if you have that guy, like that guy coming in to your franchise, and his off-ball guard is Killian Hayes. His center is Isaiah Stewart. He has Jeremy Grant and Sadiq Bey developing on the wings. What a dream developmental scenario for a young initiator to have all the pieces of his team coming up around him, to have veteran shooter. Man, Troy Weaver from the Oklahoma City organization seems to know what he's doing out there. And boy, did they get lucky that they got Cade, because if they wound up with someone like Suggs and Hayes both showed that they were kind of off-ball guys at the professional level, you might have a lineup crunch. You might have to play them both and have a jumbo. You might have to trade Grant. Cade solves a lot of problems in one draft pick. So really have to commend them there. I do want to wrap up tonight's show, rather, because it is 2 a.m. Mike Calamari and Kayla Wenzel, I can't thank you guys enough for making today's show a great one. A lot of great conversations and a lot of fun. I have to thank Dylan Balsamo and Sam Davis for coming on. I have to thank Yankees correspondent Mike Calamari for coming on, as well as Headlines Mike Calamari. So thank you. And our sports director here at WFUV is Bobby Ciaffardini. He's the best. you can go on our YouTube channel, watch clips of this episode. So if there's a segment you missed, if you want to show someone a segment, go ahead on our YouTube. Our producer, Alex Wolves, puts a whole lot of work in to help make that happen. Other than that, thank you to Mark Healey. Thank you to Brian Mahoney for coming on the show. This has been One-on-One. Make sure to check out One-on-One nightly on Wednesday nights, also a WFUV production. But this has been One-on-One, a production of WFUV Sports, and we will see you guys soon.